"Oh, thank you, Caroline. You've given me a lovely meal today. The mushroom cream soup was particularly splendid. Please give my personal thanks to your chef." "You're welcome, Mrs. Cynthia," she said with a smile. "Take the bill, business lady. You are always welcome in our cafe. Have a nice day." The tall lady in an expensive business suit nodded and walked out of the door of the establishment. Caroline, in turn, hurried to take the money to the cash register. Before doing so, she cautiously looked into the folder and found a generous tip there. "Thank you, Mrs. Cynthia," the girl thought to herself and mentally imagined how she could put this money aside to pay for her small, but so cozy flat, located in a remote area of the capital. After that, the young waitress tightened the knot on her dark maroon working apron and continued like a bee to flutter around the hall and serve the visitors who came to them for a business lunch. It was midday. That meant that most of the employees from the local business center were just about to have lunch. Caroline Butler was 22 years old and had lived in New York all her conscious life, although her mother told her that she herself had once lived in a small village in the New York area. Now the girl was orphaned by her only significant other. Her mom had died many years ago of a heart attack. The girl was only 16 at the time, and she took her mother's death very hard. It took many weeks before Caroline was finally able to pull herself together and get on with her life, out of the maelstrom of depression and longing. The only thing she had left to remember from her mother was a tiny photograph, which Caroline had placed in a small pendant in the shape of a heart. She wore this pendant without taking it off. It was like an amulet for her. In the most difficult moments, when it was difficult for her to make any responsible decision, or she was facing a difficult choice, Caroline always turned for advice and support to the spirit of her mother, with whom she communicated through a small silver jewel. The girl believed that Cheryl was her mother's name, hearing her and watching over her beloved daughter from heaven. Caroline loved New York with its bright colors and dynamic pace of life, although it was not easy to live here alone. Left without relatives, the girl finished school and immediately went to study at a culinary school. Someday, Caroline dreamed she would become a chef herself and cook the best dishes in the area, so that they would not be ashamed to serve even to some visiting celebrities. However, Caroline's dreams were not destined to come true at once. No one in the capital did not want to take a cook without any experience. All they could offer the girl was a position as a dishwasher or at best a waitress. Caroline chose the lesser of two evils, decided that the job of a waitress is still better and more profitable in terms of money than the fate of the dishwasher. Forced almost around the clock to clean up after the guests of the establishment mountains of dirty dishes. "All right," Agatha thought, "I'll work for a while. I'll gain experience and see how they have everything inside the restaurant kitchen, and then it will be further seen." Over time, the girl got so used to the lightning pace of her new job that she almost even forgot about the fact that initially wanted for herself quite different. However, this job brought her good money, and in the end, the young waitress managed to rent quite decent accommodation compared to some where she had to live before. In all this, Carolina remained a simple and friendly girl who always smiled at the sight of the guests of the cafe. She was happy to socialize with her colleagues and generally tried to keep a positive attitude in any situation. She evoked exceptionally bright and warm feelings in other people. She dressed simply and modestly, but always in clean and perfectly ironed clothes, and her attentive, light gray eyes gave her a reputation of a good listener. She was also a very interesting conversationalist, as she read a lot. Caroline liked to keep any conversation going and to be aware of everything that was going on in the huge world around her. She was like a sponge absorbing all kinds of knowledge and facts, not forgetting, however, in her free time to master new original recipes in her small home kitchen. Carolina has been working at the Silver Carp Cafe for almost 2 years. Before that time, she had managed to try herself as a waitress in several other establishments. But it was the Cafe Silver Carp became the place where the girl perfectly coincided all the conditions in terms of salary, schedule, and a good hearty team. In addition, it was here that Caroline met her happiness in the person of Harold Evans, a guy from a wealthy family who fell so much in love with the girl that he proposed within months of meeting her. Now Caroline was officially his bride, and what was the most joyful, but at the same time exciting for her, she was expecting a child from him. The term was still very small, only a couple of months, so the young people wanted to play the wedding as soon as possible. Caroline dreamed of looking as good as possible in the wedding dress, so that she would not have to adjust it to the features of Tia that had changed during pregnancy. Who would have thought that we would do it? Sometimes the girl thought to herself. We met then quite by chance. Caroline remembered the day when a quiet, brooding-looking young man with beautiful brown curls and a large, dictionary-like book in his hands had come into the cafe. Harold then ordered only coffee and a salad and chicken sandwich. The young waitress was just rushing to take his order when, ironically, a glass of juice fell to the floor from one of the neighboring tables and shattered. Even rubberist soles could not save her from a fatal pirouette, which the girl made by slipping on the sweet liquid. Oh, Caroline only managed to exhale when she saw the coffee cup topple over onto the neat, shiny hair of the young man reading. Harold shrieked loudly, more from surprise than pain. However, the flavored liquid had completely flooded his well-groomed hair and was now dripping down the lad's indignant face in large coffee milk drops. "What do you mean?" Choked with indignation, he began, but immediately stopped talking when he saw the confused waitress in front of him. "Forgive me, please. I'll bring you some napkins right away. Coffee and a sandwich will be on the house, of course." The young guest's face softened. He looked at the girl standing in front of him from head to toe, and then said at the same time, trying to brush off the remnants of thick liquid, "Come on, calm down. Nothing terrible happened. I must stretch myself. I have to take my head out of my reading once in a while." Caroline glanced briefly at his book. It was a thick economics textbook, and the girl quickly concluded that it was probably a student in front of her. "Napkins, though, you need them." "I'll be right back," Caroline assured him and ran to the back room. When she returned to the table a couple of minutes later, the guy was already gone. However, on the smooth wooden surface there was money and a small piece of paper. Confused at the end, the girl reached out and took a few notes and a note with only 2 words on it. "Pick you up later. Harold." Caroline was surprised and intrigued, and for the rest of the day she could not get this mysterious young visitor out of her mind. In the evening, Harold did pick Caroline up. He apologized to her for not being able to stay. However, according to the guy, he just had to start another pair soon, so he hurried back to the university. The young people got to know each other better, and as it turned out, they had much more in common than it might seem at first glance. Harold, just like the girl, simply adored reading, especially detectives. Whichever book Caroline named, it turned out that her new acquaintance had already read it and could formulate a clear opinion about its plot and main characters. Sympathy between them flared up at once. At first, the guy picked up the waitress after her shift and drove her home, and in their free time from work in the cafe, if in school they walked in the park or went to the cinema. For the first time in her life, Caroline was happy that she had a real admirer. Previously, she had not taken seriously the few courtships of her classmates and then classmates at the technical college. With Harold, however, it was different. The girl felt a beautiful, tender feeling of love arising inside her, which was growing stronger every day and was drawn to the same feeling that had arisen in the heart of her lover. After 5 months of tender and stormy relationship, Harold one evening took his beloved to a very expensive and luxurious restaurant. There, embarrassed and blushing, he took out of his pocket a small velvet box of blue color. Caroline's heart beat very fast as she took this box and her fingers trembling with excitement. "Is it really?" The girl couldn't finish her sentence and covered her mouth with the palm of her hand, feeling like she was about to cry. "And just open it," Harold asked, seemingly ready at any moment to start dancing with joy and pull Caroline with him. The girl slowly and very carefully pressed the latch and opened the dainty case. There on a tiny velvet cushion lay a gold ring with a large diamond. The drop-shaped stone, like a dewdrop, was framed by the finest gold stems. The piece looked absolutely divine. "God, it's so beautiful," Caroline whispered, stammering with an excess of emotion. "Caroline, do you like it?" Harold asked with hope in his voice. "No," he spoke hastily. "That is not at all what I wanted to ask you. Caroline, will you marry me?" Caroline felt tears of happiness welling up in her eyes. Delight filled her heart, for now she was sure that the groom loved her as much as she loved him. The girl put her arms around Harold's neck, kissed him tenderly, and then asked playfully, "What do you think? Should I think about it, or should I go right ahead with it?" Taking advantage of the guy's second confusion, Caroline laughed happily and lightly touched the tip of his nose with the words, "My beloved, of course I agree." "Yes, yes, yes." Harold happily embraced his bride, and they continued to enjoy their evening together. A week after the engagement, Caroline realized she was pregnant. At first, she was very afraid to admit it to her fiancé. She was very worried about it, but one way or another she would have to tell Harold about the baby, especially since they were going to have dinner with his parents. The young man couldn't wait to introduce his fiancée to them. Luckily, the groom was excited about the upcoming addition to their young family, and he hurried to tell his father and mother about it. Caroline discouraged him, believing that he should wait until dinner first, and if he was so eager, announce it there. But the lad persisted in his determination. From that moment on, the young waitress's life rapidly began to turn into a real nightmare. Marion and Jonathan Evans were literally shocked to see their future daughter-in-law. The groom's mother had never expected such a turn of events. This willful, demanding and incredibly capricious woman immediately disliked the girl as soon as she saw her at that first joint family dinner. "Caroline, tell me, do you always dress so plainly? Is it some sort of deliberate carelessness, indicative of a specific taste, or a deliberate strategy in your style? Maybe these things actually belong to some little known but niche, that is, especially expensive brands that not everyone can afford." Marion looked at the girl with a look full of dislike. Caroline then immediately realized that she would not have an easy time with her future mother-in-law. Not at all. The waitress smiled as friendly as possible, trying not to reveal the terrible anxiety she felt in the presence of the groom's mother. "I just don't think it makes sense to spend a lot of money on everyday clothes. Brands, after all, deliberately inflate the price largely still for the famous name written on the label. But why should we do that if we still tear off the label before putting on a dress? Besides, a lot of good and practical things can be found in ordinary shops." Caroline somehow didn't want to get into an open confrontation with Marion, as she realized that it wouldn't end well for her anyway. There was no point in proving anything to someone who had already made up her mind, and the future mother-in-law seemed to have already come to unequivocal conclusions about the girl. "Practical," hissed Harold's mother through her teeth. "Well, that explains a great deal. You said, didn't you, it seems, that your mother came from the village?" "Mom," Harold exclaimed involuntarily, choking on a piece of baked duck. "What did I say?" The mother looked at her son indignantly. "A man shouldn't be ashamed of his origins, especially when he wants to enter a family as honorable as ours. Isn't that right, dear?" She turned to her husband. "Better to lay all the cards on the table at once, so that we don't have to wonder why some foreign admixture might suddenly appear in our breed." The woman said the last phrase with an obvious allusion to her son's fiancée. By that time, Harold had already informed them of his lover's pregnancy. Caroline flared up in a flash, but held back, only clutching the corner of a small tablecloth under her chair. "And I'm not embarrassed about anything, Marion," Caroline answered her calmly. "There are people living and working in the country too, by the way, no less, and sometimes much more, than in the city." "Marion, what on earth has bitten you today?" muttered Jonathan in a friendly tone. "Caroline is right. I, too, am against a woman spending too large a sum on clothes. No, I understand boots, fur coats once every 5 years." His wife gave the businessman a look that he preferred not to pursue the subject further. Harold's father, of course, was not particularly fond of his daughter-in-law either. However, he tried to keep his emotions and discontent under control. After all, his son would have to live with this simpleton, not them. Besides, "All right, thank you, Mammy," Harold responded cheerfully. He seemed not to notice at all the blatant sarcasm and humiliation directed at his fiancée. "Caroline will be only too happy to have your help, won't she? Everyone in our circle knows you have the most exquisite, refined taste. Don't you?" Harold addressed his bride. "You will accept my mother's help with the wedding, won't you?" She looked into the eyes of Harold's mother and realized that she would do everything in her power to make the preparations for the ceremony a nightmare for the girl. Marion looked at her with a cold calculation before which her sister-in-law herself was but a helpless victim. "Gladly" was all the young waitress could manage to squeeze out of her mouth, and at the same time she put on her best smile. The rest of the evening passed in the same tension and constant attempts of her mother-in-law to hurt poor Caroline. She did not understand why she could not please her future in-laws so much. Was it only the fact that her roots were from the village? But what hurt the girl even more was the almost zero reaction to all these sneers of her fiancé. It was as if Harold was under the constant influence of his parents, afraid to say a word against their will. How could this be possible? After all, alone with Caroline, he was a completely different person, self-sufficient, self-confident, and certainly would not run at the first call of his overbearing mother. But what if he was? What if the guy's behavior was just a cover-up intended to win her, Caroline's, heart? But the girl felt that the groom loved her, and that's why she hoped that he could still have the courage to talk to his parents, explaining to them that you can't do this to people who are not 5 minutes old. As soon as the young people left, the following conversation took place in the house between the spouses. "No, Jonathan, did you see that? Did you see who he brought home? It's a simple girl. She's a beggar and still there, married to a rich man. I don't understand the young people of today. It has been said so many times on television and in books. There is no happiness between partners whose union is not socially equal. No, they are still trying to get into the elite, by any means necessary. Only a blind man can't see that Caroline is a redneck, not worth our son's little finger. She managed to get pregnant by him, too. She made a clever move. I can't say anything." Marion paced the drawing room with her arms folded across her chest. It was her usual way of expressing her extreme dissatisfaction with the situation. "If it weren't for Caroline, my son might have proposed to Maggie by now," Jonathan said dreamily, but a little sadly, as he sat down in a wide leather armchair and lit an expensive Cuban cigar. "Where did she come from? Maggie's father, Oliver, is a longtime business partner of ours. He's hinted on more than one occasion that it would be a good idea for our families to be related. I mean, being the same age. They're equal in status, and most importantly, we could merge our businesses together. It would be a win-win for everyone." "But no, Harold's having adventures." The man exhaled a perfectly even ring of smoke. "What am I telling you?" The spouse continued to be indignant. "Oliver, his fortune is in eight figures. But where else is our son going to find such an excellent bride? It's like winning the top prize in the lottery. One chance in a million." "Jonathan," she said to her husband in a commanding tone that made him flinch a little, causing him to cough up his Cuban decos. "What?" Overcoming his cough, he asked his wife, and looked at her with genuine incomprehension. "But what?" "Talk to him seriously." "Talk?" Marian rolled her eyes. Sometimes she thought her husband was too slow-witted, which was why he missed out on exactly half of the money they could have now. "How do you imagine that?" The man genuinely marveled. "Am I going to go and say to him, 'Sonny dear, why don't you leave your poor pregnant bride and marry Maggie Brown? She's got a richer father. And anyway, we've got capital to rebuild.' Is that it?" Jonathan brushed the remnants of ash off his homemade jacket. "He won't thank you and me for that," he continued. "What's more, Marian will lose him completely then. Do you know how hot guys are at 25? God forbid he should run off with that provincial girl. We'll never see him or our grandson again. Do you want that?" Marian tapped her lip thoughtfully with a sharp fingernail with a perfect wine-colored matte manicure. "We don't know if it's our grandson at all. What if she got pregnant by someone else and decided to put someone else's baby on our son? That's the spirit of all those cunning provincials. You meet a rich guy and you get him right away, so he won't be able to get away with it." Jonathan shook his head negatively. "Come on, Marian. I don't believe it. I saw the way Harold looked at that girl, and she at him. Their love is mutual and real. And Caroline would not bear a child by another man. If you put it that way, it wouldn't be good for her. They realize that we can do a genetic test at any time, even without her son's knowledge." Jonathan looked at his wife eloquently. The elder Evans was 57 years old, while his beloved wife had not long ago turned 54. Until recently, their family had been quite affluent. Jonathan ran a successful business. Marian kept her own boutique of fashionable Italian clothes and accessories. That all changed 2 years ago when their financial situation took a sharp turn for the worse. Jonathan made several fatal mistakes when making a number of important deals. Because of this, the family rapidly turned from rich businessmen into middle-order businessmen. To Jonathan's credit, he never blamed anyone for his failures, well aware that he himself then poorly calculated the possible risks, the fall in profits one way or another. They no longer had so much money to afford to play the field of more serious players. So Harold's marriage to the daughter of a long-time and reliable business partner was just about to solve the problem of renewing the family capital. Jonathan. Far-sighted parents dreamed of choosing a rich and promising bride for their son, and Maggie was the perfect choice. However, these dreams dissipated when Harold brought a poor waitress from a simple family into their home. "All right, we'll see if the bride can stand my special character." Marian smiled slyly at her husband. "Our Harold, after all, is very mild and suggestible. Sooner or later he will see with his own eyes that such a simpleton, this Caroline, is no match for him at all. Let us hope it will be before they go to the wedding." "What about the child, Marian?" Jonathan inquired cautiously. "It's quite simple, dear. If the child is ours, then she'll put up with everything and keep quiet, only to please our son. Still, she can't help realizing what a fortune she's made." "But what if she doesn't?" The woman looked expressively at her husband. He smiled understandingly and nodded briefly to his wife. "Then maybe all is not yet lost. Maggie shouldn't be discounted." The father finished for his wife and, satisfied, put out the rest of his cigar in the ashtray. Caroline stood in front of the mirror in the bedroom of her small flat and looked carefully at her reflection. She was pale, and there were dark shadows under her eyes, a sign of fatigue and emotional distress. Almost automatically, she adjusted the translucent white veil that was fluttering behind her back. It instantly responded to her mistress with a soft sheen, barely visible in the glass, after which the light weightlessness of the fabric was revealed. After that, Caroline lowered her gaze. The wedding dress fit her perfectly, as did the pearl drop earrings and the neat tiara made of hundreds of small, shimmering crystals. Her stomach was still as flat under the dress as it had been 3 weeks ago, even though she was exactly 3 months pregnant. That was normal. Cheryl had once told her daughter that her pregnancy was almost invisible until the 6th month. It was only then that the young mom's belly literally began to grow in front of her eyes. But despite the marvelous dress and luxurious wedding set, Caroline did not feel happy. God knows with what incredible labor she managed to repel from the future mother-in-law this particular version of her wedding attire. The last few weeks had been terrible for our heroine. Marion disliked everything about her, and no matter what the girl did to please her, everything was wrong. The mother of her fiancé did not like anything, not how Caroline cooked, or how she dressed, or how she moved at the rehearsals of their with Harold wedding waltz. Sometimes daughter-in-law even caught herself thinking that her mother-in-law must be dissatisfied with the way the girl breathed. Jonathan also added fuel to the fire, as he either agreed with his gloating wife or kept silent, reproaching Caroline, saying, "What can we do? That's the kind of daughter-in-law we have." She had to silently tolerate all this negativity or make jokes, making herself look even more ignorant in their society. Harold, of course, took his mother's words in a positive context and thought that Marion was teaching her future daughter-in-law the basics of survival in a secular society. The young fiancé almost never stood up for the girl, and if he did so in some particularly acute moments, the last word in arguments still always remained with his toxic mother. The last scandal that had been caused by the groom's parents had happened just a couple of days ago. They literally drove the girl to hysterics, so that she even feared for the life of her still quite tiny child. That day, Marion and Jonathan announced that they refused to see friends and colleagues from the cafe from the bride's side as guests at the wedding. Not only that, but the mother-in-law insisted that Maggie, the daughter of their longtime business partner, be the maid of honor. Such a turn, of course, upset Caroline terribly, and she tried to stand up for her real friends. "I don't understand, Marion. What exactly is it about my guests that displeases you?" she asked, clenching her hands into fists with despair. "They are wonderful, cultured people. I've been working side by side with them for 2 years now, and I've never once had a complaint about them, either from our cafe patrons or from anyone else." Before she could reply, Harold's mother laughed wryly. "No. Do you seriously suppose I'm going to allow any poor people to go to my only son's wedding? Are you out of your mind at all, girl? Wake up. We'll have dozens of famous guests coming to the restaurant, many of them people of such high standing that you've never dreamed of. Their cufflinks alone are worth more than your entire cafe. No, that's out of the question. This is not a village party where everyone gets drunk by the end of the evening and starts singing folk songs. This is a different kind of event. By calling these people poor, you're calling me poor. Do you even realize that?" Caroline said, unable to hold back the tears that choked her. "My love, you take it all too personally," Harold cut in. "Mummy wants what's best. In fact, there really will be some very influential guests there. I'm not saying your friends are any bad. I'm just saying that they may indeed be uncomfortable being in the company of wealthy people like that." "I would ask you not to insult my loved ones," the girl said aloud, unable to stand it. "Calm down," Jonathan waved her hand in the direction of Marion's consort. "Or she just can't get over the fact that our son has essentially lifted her out of poverty. But it's hard for a man to believe in his happiness at once. It happens. It's okay. We will definitely be able to re-educate her." Caroline, too, no longer embarrassed, cried, standing in front of her rich relatives and fiancé, feeling incomparable humiliation. Finally, she quietly whispered towards her future mother-in-law, "Do whatever you want. I can't take it anymore." With these words, the girl ran out of the restaurant, where they discussed the upcoming festivities, and rushed to her home. On the way, she heard Harold call her by name. But Caroline did not turn round. The groom did not hurry to run after his beloved, reasonably believing that her emotions were probably heightened by the pregnancy and the upcoming wedding, and that it would be better to just give her some time to come to her senses and calm down. And now the far from happy bride stood in her room and thought about whether she should marry a man who was not only unable to protect his woman from the attacks of her relatives, but also agreed with them, making her feel worthless and Sponger, whom she would marry only because she was carrying a child and a dear heir under her heart. The car was to arrive at her door in half an hour, to take her first to the registry office, and then to the fancy restaurant where Marion was in charge. Caroline looked in the mirror again and saw the girl's lips quivering in the reflection. After stroking her stomach and taking one long, deep breath, the girl resolutely pulled off her veil and tiara and threw them on the bed. Quickly changing into jeans and a comfortable shirt, Caroline threw all the essentials into her suitcase. She slipped out of the house as inconspicuously as possible, trying not to be seen by the neighbors. In half an hour, she was already sitting on a bench near the bus station and crying bitterly. The girl had actually run away from her own wedding, although she had the most tender feelings for her fiancé, but she could not accept his weak will and the absence of any support from his side. This was not how Caroline had planned her married life. The last thing in the world she wanted was to be just another piece of furniture in someone's ornate living room, from which she could be thrown out at any moment, if only such a piece of furniture bored its overbearing owners. "What's wrong? Honey, why are you crying?" suddenly asked the girl by someone's affectionate voice. Caroline slowly withdrew her hands from her face and looked at the speaker. In front of her stood a genteel old woman. The old woman was carrying a small wheeled cart filled to the brim with something. From beneath the mottled kerchief on her head, silver white strands were poking out. "I don't get any ideas. I was just passing by to buy a bus ticket," the woman continued to say. "I could see that you were unwell. I thought I'd ask you if there was anything I could do to help." "I don't know. I seem to be lost in this life," said Caroline, sobbing, wiping away her tears with her fist. "Yesterday it seemed like I still had everything ahead of me. A whole new world would open up. And today it seems that I have lost everything and destroyed it all with my own hands. But I couldn't do otherwise." The old woman looked at her carefully, as if she were trying to see something special in Caroline's appearance that she could not see. At last the woman suggested, "The traveler on the road won't last long without a signpost. Come with me to the village. It's not far, about 15 to 20 kilometers. My name is Megan," the old woman introduced herself. "What do you mean, come with you?" The girl was confused. "No, I shouldn't. I don't feel comfortable somehow. I am, you see, expecting a child. Why should I embarrass you?" Megan smiled slyly. "Oh, come on, honey. If I was embarrassed, I wouldn't be proposing to you. I live alone, but I don't starve. I am a healer. I can cure any ailment if I choose the right herbs, and people pay me well for my predictions. I tell fortunes accurately and always correctly. I can tell you everything about any person except for myself and my family. That's forbidden. But time doesn't make me look young." In response to this, the mistress thoughtfully remarked that everyone would be rewarded according to his deeds, and the highest justice will surely come to these people. People came to Megan from different towns and distant villages all the time, and all of them needed the help of an old woman who could see the future and cure almost all diseases. Gradually, the witch doctor began to teach her skills to Carolina, trusting her first to mix simple potions from dried herbs, and later to prepare healing concoctions. One day the girl asked her to read her fortune, and Megan gladly agreed. But no matter how much the fortune teller looked into the lines on Caroline's hand, she couldn't see anything. "That's odd," the woman said slowly, twisting the girl's palm this way and that in front of her. "What do you see?" The young woman's curiosity made her herself draw her face closer to the mysterious drawings that twisted along her left hand. "I can't see anything." "The fog is thick." The fortune teller blinked and let Caroline's palm out of her hand. "You must be tired today. I'll tell fortunes another time." Caroline did not pester the old woman, though she was curious about what might await her in the future. She had seen with her own eyes how Megan put almost hopeless people on their feet, and therefore she had no doubts about the power of her gift. The young girl had no idea that Megan spent the whole of the next night next to her bed, scrutinizing the sleeping Caroline's face. "What is wrong with you?" Megan asked herself. "Why can't I see this girl's life? Has the gift become weaker because of age?" The healer took a deep breath and shook her head sadly. It wasn't time for her to lose her power yet. Oh, it wasn't time. Once, when Caroline was recounting to the old woman the contents of the many love stories she had read while living in the city, she mentioned that her mother had taught her to read and showed her a picture of Cheryl. Megan stared at the face of the young woman in the photo for a moment. Then slowly she asked the assistant, "Jesus, honey, where did you get that picture?" The elderly healer's voice and hands trembled like an autumn leaf in the wind. Caroline was even startled. "Megan, are you not feeling well? Would you like some tincture or stronger tea? Just tell me, and I'll be right out. I don't like the look on your face. You've become very pale." The healer, instead of answering, clung to the girl's hands, holding her on the wooden bench from which Caroline was struggling to get up. Megan felt her breath was about to stop if she didn't hear the answer to her main question. "Caroline, don't dither. Tell me, where did you get that picture?" The old woman almost shouted to her pregnant assistant. "So my mother left it to me shortly before she died," said Caroline, looking at the woman with undisguised amazement. She did not understand what her benefactress could have found so intriguing about the face on the old, rather faded photograph. Nevertheless, the girl continued, not wanting to offend Megan. This photo was once taken by my dad on my mom's camera. My mom said my dad was a trucker. One day his car broke down on the road and he stopped by her village. When they saw each other, they fell in love. They only had one night together. The next day, my father had to be back on a flight. Mom never saw him again. And 9 months later, I was born. And the only evidence that I had a mom and dad is contained in this little photo card. That's the story. Caroline closed the lid of the pendant with a sad smile. It can't be, the elderly healer whispered slowly and suddenly rushed to a chest of drawers. She rummaged around and pulled out an old, tattered photo album. Carefully sitting back down on the bench, Megan opened the album in front of the girl. "Look," she ordered the young assistant in a trembling voice. Then she poked first one photo in turn, then another and a third. Now it was Carolina's turn to be surprised. Her own mother was looking at her from the numerous color and black and white photos. The young girl felt the ground go from under her feet. "What?" she whispered, unable to contain the flood of emotions that suddenly came over her. The feelings, like a turbulent mountain river, risked dragging her into its bottomless maelstrom. But I couldn't even think. "It turns out my mom lived here. Did you know her, Megan?" The old witch doctor only shook her head instead of answering. Every word she spoke fell on Caroline's heart like a heavy stone. "Not only knew, my girl," she whispered excitedly. "Lord, what an old fool I am. I couldn't think of anything at once." Caroline pressed the palm of her hand to her mouth to keep from shrieking from the emotion that overwhelmed her. She was both afraid to hear the truth and already guessed what the older healer was trying to tell her. "That's why I couldn't see anything about you," the old woman said, with difficulty holding back the tears glistening in her eyes. "Caroline, you are my blood kin, my granddaughter." For a moment, Caroline stared at Megan in silence. And then the realization came over her in a powerful and hot wave. "Grandmother," the girl said slowly, sobbing. "But how can this be? How is this possible?" Shocked, Caroline could hardly imagine that the woman who had treated herself and her unborn child was actually her blood relative, and not just anyone, but her grandmother, the most related person on earth after her mother. "Will you let me hold you?" Caroline asked timidly. Megan didn't bother to answer anything. She only rushed over to her newfound granddaughter and clasped her in a tight hug. "Grandma, Grandma, I can't believe it. How long I've dreamed of having any more loved ones left on earth. And here." Caroline stopped being shy and cried. "My darling," Megan answered her also through her tears. "My heart felt that fate had brought me to you for a reason. Something inside me knocked that I should have stopped by your side and offered you help. And this is what it turns out to be. Native blood." A little later, when both women sat down at the table, Caroline decided to brew her grandmother a healing potion. The shock of the previous day was too great. Megan continued to tell Caroline her mother's story. For the pregnant assistant, it was as if the healer had opened some kind of secret door through which Caroline could see the shadows of her own past. "Your mom Cheryl lived in this very house a long time ago," Megan said, wiping her tears with the sleeve of her shirt. "I put all the pictures away on purpose so I wouldn't have to go through all the trouble. My daughter and I were fighting about her unplanned pregnancy. I told her that she should have learnt my gift, helped people, and she didn't want any of that. Cheryl wanted a normal and peaceful life for herself with a husband and child. She said she was going into town to look for Stephen. That was the trucker dad's name. That's where she gave birth to you. I never saw her again. She stopped writing almost immediately. I thought she'd found happiness. It must have been a simple resentment, a misunderstanding. Would you know, granddaughter, how much I would have given to see your mom for just a moment, to say, 'Cheryl, how much I've missed you all these years.'" Caroline sympathetically covered the witch doctor's hand with her own and tried to reassure her. "You shouldn't be so upset, Granny. Mom couldn't track Dad down then." "What, really? Really?" "The town was too big, and it's not like he was really there. But whatever it is, I'm by your side now and I'll never leave you. I swear to you." Megan, who had calmed down, perked up again. "So what are we sitting around for? Granddaughter, let's go to that herald of yours and his family and show those scoundrels where they belong. I'll put such a curse on them if they don't apologize to you that no priest will ever be able to cleanse them." Caroline gestured to stop the older woman's resolute attitude. "It's no use, Granny. They don't need me," the girl said with sadness in her voice. "If he hasn't even called me once in all this time, it means I've been written off long ago. Suddenly, when we get there, they'll have guards on us. What can I say? Rich people can afford to change girls like gloves." Megan gave her granddaughter a hard look. but backed off nonetheless. She looks just like Cheryl. Don't you worry too much. We got by without him. We'll live on, and not worse than them, rich and heartless. And so they went on living. 6 months later, in due time, Caroline gave birth to a wonderful son, who was named Michael. The boy was very similar to his mother and grandmother, and Caroline was secretly glad. At least there were no traits that could remind her of her broken heart and unfulfilled hopes. Megan loved her favorite great-grandson and, despite her advanced age, never stopped playing with him and telling him their local village tales. A year passed. One evening during a heavy downpour, Megan heard a quiet knock on the door. Who could that be? Caroline asked, who was fiddling with little Michael on a large round knitted rug. Mother and son were playing with a small fluffy kitten that had come to their house this summer. The old witch doctor frowned at first, then pressed her lips together as if she sensed something amiss. Sit in the next room, granddaughter, she commanded. Go in there with Michael. I'll get it. Caroline became anxious, though she complied with her grandmother's request. Just in case, she closed the door loosely behind her so she could hear what was going on in the front room. Megan unlocked the thick oak door, letting the drenched travelers in. It was a married couple, husband and wife, gaunt, seemingly lost in their last hope. What have you come for? The witch doctor asked them rudely. And I thought you wouldn't come at all. Well, it must have been the higher powers that brought you here, since you came on foot to such a distance. All the buses were canceled, a man in his 60s complained to her, so we had to literally knead the mud with our feet. Would you be so kind as to let us at least shelter from the weather in your shed until morning? The healer was silent at first, and then turned to the woman. What do you want? I see that trouble has brought you to me. Otherwise, you would not have sought my way forever. I have taken care of that. She looked at the late visitor with a frown, not at all friendly. We have a son missing, the woman said, choking back her own tears. His name is Harold. It's been 3 weeks since we've been able to find him. We've had the police and private detectives involved, all to no avail. No car, no sign of him, no sign of him. Help, for God's sake. The woman, sobbing, pressed a dirty handkerchief to her eyes, and her husband began to stroke her shoulders, trying to calm her down. We were brought to you by word of mouth. They say you can find a person from a photograph, he said, and pulled out a medium-sized photo from the inside pocket of his waterproof jacket. Here, look, please. Maybe he is at least still alive. The fortune teller reluctantly took the photograph from his hands and, looking at the chap depicted on it with frank dislike, whispered, Is that what you are, son-in-law? At that moment, the door creaked open and Caroline came out with her son in her arms. The young mother looked at the newcomers with contempt. After all, they were the ones who had lost their favorite son, Michael's father, and were now looking up at their failed daughter-in-law with their necks craned, completely shocked at what was happening. And good evening to you, Marion. You see, I'm back in my native village, just as you dreamed. The girl's eyes burned with outright hatred towards the people who had, in fact, broken her life. Why did you mock me while you were in power? And now you've come to my grandmother to ask for help, Caroline said angrily. Caroline, my dear, forgive us for Christ's sake. Marion, as she was in her gym trousers and boots, fell on her knees before the girl. We were fools, I repent, not to see our happiness in you. We married our son to that Maggie, and she turned out to be such a bitch. That's where the snake was, wasn't it? But only not immediately they were able to see it. The witch doctor squinted, answering her granddaughter. That maiden and her father raked up the rest of our wealth and left us all naked. Jonathan nodded, looking at the women with regret and pleading. Harold decided to start a construction firm to feed the 3 of us somehow. But he's had some bad luck, he continued. Caroline, forgive me and my neglectful wife. Only you can save our Harold. Whatever you want for you and your grandson we will do. Forgive us fools, eh? Caroline, though angry at her frustrated in-laws, but her heart was not made of stone. Besides, she'd never wished Harold dead, so she nodded to her grandmother. And the latter, after waving her hand over the picture for a few seconds, said slowly, I see your son is alive. They keep him in a room, but not in a simple one, but somewhere deep underground. Either a cellar of some kind or, I can't say for sure. There's a tall, curly-haired man standing next to him. His name is strange, outlandish, not ours, not Russian. Ben, I can also smell the letter. I see it as B. The strangers pondered for a minute over what the fortune teller had said. Then Jonathan's face suddenly brightened. Ben Black, that's right. That's Harold's friend. They raised that young firm together, the one Harold went to negotiate the contract for, and he's got a bunker under his house. He bragged about it to us when he came to visit. Following that, Marion cried and thanked Megan and Caroline. Thank you. We're going to go back right now and report everything to the police. You don't need to go anywhere right now, the witch doctor replied. There's bad weather raging outside. It's dangerous. You'll go in the morning. Now, get undressed. We'll soon have dinner. I'm heating soup in the pot. At least you'll meet my grandson. If Caroline doesn't mind. I don't mind, her granddaughter answered her in a calm but slightly detached tone. Only don't take him in your arms. He doesn't like strangers trying to hold him. He's not used to it yet. But I'm not a stranger, Marion said with a touch of resentment in her voice. I'm his grandmother. It's too early to talk about that, Caroline reminded her. We'll see about that later. In the meantime, try just talking to him for a start. All evening the guests fiddled with their grandson. In the morning they took the first bus back to the city. There they gave the police all the information they had, and operatives were immediately sent to Bleck's cottage. It was exactly as Megan had seen it. The businessman decided to deceive Harold and tried to take over Harold's promising firm. However, Ben turned out to be a coward and failed to personally eliminate the young man. Instead, he locked him in a bunker under his house, where he hoped to starve him to death, and then take his body into the woods and make it look like Harold got. How could you think of an old woman having a baby? Ashley, a blonde girl of 13, stood on the porch of the school and watched as her friend Emily, who was in the same class as her, talked to her older brother. Ashley dreamed now of being in her classmate's shoes and having a conversation with the guy. The girl had fallen in love with her friend's brother Jason last year, and she didn't even realize how it happened. Ashley just woke up one day with thoughts of this teenager, and after that she thought about the guy all the time. As soon as the girl realized that she had fallen in love, she started giving signs of attention to the high schooler. She planted unsigned love notes, but soon she, as a secret admirer, was exposed, and ridicule from Jason's buddy followed. Ashley felt strongly about it at the time. However, her mother Mary, who knew about her daughter's crush, told her to keep her mind off the guy. You're still young, and it's far away. You're not in love, just a crush. As time passes, you'll laugh at your own crush. But a year had passed, and Ashley was still in love with Jason. And now she was standing there watching Emily's friend talking to her brother. Ashley, watching the conversation between the two, dreamed about how her lover would come to her and confess his feelings to her. The girl noticed her friend and her brother heading towards her. Ashley felt a slight shiver go down her spine. She tried to pull herself together. In the meantime, the pair approached her, and Jason said with a good-natured smile, "Hey you need to grow up a little." And then, looking back at the older kids, maybe you're expecting those words from me. But my sister has already told me that you are withering from unrequited love. Ashley, hearing those words, shuddered involuntarily, as if from a blow. The girl looked at her friend reproachfully, and then she turned and ran away. At the moment, she didn't care that she was acting like a cranky little girl. Ashley was annoyed by her lover's words. She was also hurt that her friend was secretly talking to her brother about her. Ashley ran and heard Emily asking her to stop and talk. However, the girl was not responding to her mate's cries. Ashley wanted to run home now, lock herself in her room, and let the tears flow, which soon happened. When the girl calmed down, she made a vow to herself that she would not talk to her friend again, and she also promised herself that she would tear her love for Jason out of her heart and would not look in his direction again. And when Mary's mother came home from work, Ashley pronounced to her, "I don't hang out with Emily anymore. So if she comes over, just tell her I'm not here." What'd you get? It's no big deal. You'll make up in a couple days. By the way, what was the fight about? What was it about? It's a long conversation. Emily's a traitor. That's a pretty big thing to say. You can't make such serious accusations against a man, especially since Emily is your friend. Why don't you tell me what happened? Mary said affectionately and sat down next to her daughter. Ashley looked at her mother carefully, then excitedly told her what had happened. The woman listened to her daughter, and then she patted her head and said softly, "Your friend cares about you. She wanted to do you a good favor." Emily thought that talking to her brother about you might help draw the boy's attention to you. But what her friend didn't realize was that you can't command the heart. If Jason doesn't care about you, there's nothing you can do about it. Mary paused for a moment. Then, with a sad sigh, she said, "You surprised me, daughter. I thought you weren't thinking about Jason anymore. You're getting a little secretive. Or is it my own fault that I don't notice anything but work?" "Mom, don't say that," Ashley said. "I'm not hiding anything from you, I just don't want to worry you. You really work so hard that I don't want you to worry about me. Taking care of you is the best part for me. You're the only one I've got. And you have to work hard for one simple reason: you need money. Your grandparents on my side of the family are long gone. Your father divorced me 2 years ago and forgot about the obligation to pay child support. And your grandparents on your daddy's side don't need you. Why not? You see, daughter, in some families it happens that parents have 2 children and one child becomes the favorite. That's what happened in your daddy's family. He didn't become a favorite from mom and dad, and as a result they don't need you as a granddaughter. If before the divorce with your father they still congratulated you on your birthday, now it does not happen. And you know it yourself. Mom, you always told me that you and Dad got divorced because that's how life works. How does it happen?" her daughter asked her mother in a low voice. Ashley had longed to know the answer, but there had never been the right occasion for such a conversation. Mary sighed softly, put her arm around her and said, "You're getting older and older every day, and I don't even notice it. Well, I'll answer your question. Your father fell in love with another woman who gave him a child, the son he dreamed of. So he made a choice, but not in our direction. Just don't blame him or judge him. Life is complicated. You'll realize that later." After talking to her mom, Ashley felt a lot better. She even took her mind off the fact that she was upset with her friend. The girl kept thinking about the relationship between her parents, and also pondered how she would act in her mother's situation. And in the evening, when Emily called to apologize, Ashley interrupted her and said that she was no longer offended, but she added, "Now it's nothing personal. I won't trust you, or you'll tell the whole world." I moved on, and now Ashley was 16. The New Year's Eve ball was coming up. The girl carefully thought over her closet for these holidays. She hoped that her friend's brother would come to the ball. Ashley told Emily that she had invited Jason to the event, and Ashley, against all odds, secretly continued to love Jason all this time. And now the girl is already in the auditorium where the New Year's Eve ball has begun. She looks around, hoping to see her lover. Ashley nervously corrects the gatherings on her cornflower-colored dress. The girl had seen this outfit in the store a long time ago, and her mother went to meet her needs and bought it without paying for utilities. Ashley knew about all this, and when the purchase was made, she was nervous because she knew how sensitive they were to late payments. But she wasn't thinking about that now. She wanted to see Jason and to win him over with her appearance. For some reason, she was sure that would happen. Ashley was not fooled in her expectations. Slow music started playing and the DJ announced a white dance. A classmate approached the girl to ask her to dance. Ashley smilingly wanted to point out that the ladies were now choosing the suitors while agreeing. As she suddenly noticed Jason, who had just walked into the auditorium with a buddy. Ashley smiled at her classmate and bluntly refused the offer to dance. The girl fixed her blonde curls, headed toward Jason, walked up to the young man, smiled radiantly, and spoke amiably. "Perhaps tonight your highness will indulge us in a dance at the New Year's Eve ball." Jason looked at the girl, although he saw her at school every day, but on weekdays she seemed to him to be an ordinary schoolgirl who was not different from her peers. Basically, the guy just didn't pay attention to Ashley. But at that moment she stood in front of him, as if she were a chic woman who had stepped off the cover of a fashion magazine. Jason looked at Ashley and couldn't understand how in one day she could transform herself so much. He couldn't help but voice his thoughts aloud. "You're like a fairy tale, from an ugly duckling to a beautiful swan. I can't believe I'm standing in front of Ashley, the same Ashley who's been bugging me for years with her crushes. Are you going to grumble or dance with me when the music stops?" he said with a smile. Ashley didn't say anything else, but simply stepped toward Jason. Soon the couple was dancing. Ashley couldn't believe that she was being embraced by the man she dreamed of for so many years, that he would notice her in some way. And Jason continued to marvel at how much his sister's friend had changed. The dance ended. Ashley hurried over to Emily. Jason tried to hold her back, but she just smiled back and headed toward her friend. Emily winked at her friend, but she waved back and sat down on a bench. The music in the room was energetic. Ashley watched the dancers and occasionally glanced at Jason, who was also watching her. At one point she looked at the guy again, but he was gone. She looked around confused as she suddenly heard the DJ's announcement. "This beautiful tune one man dedicates to a beautiful girl named Ashley and asks her to dance." Before Ashley realized what was being said, Jason appeared in front of her and held out his hand. Jason offered to dance again, and soon the couple was dancing to a beautiful melody. They danced together more than once that night, and when the New Year's Eve ball was over, Jason volunteered to walk them home. The couple walked down the snowy road holding hands. At first they were silent, unable to find the right words. But when they reached the girl's house, Jason suddenly turned Ashley toward him and said quietly, "Will you be my girlfriend?" Ashley laughed, then showed her boyfriend her tongue and hurried toward the house. Jason frowned. "I don't see what's so funny. I'm serious." After he said that, the girl stopped and then walked leisurely back toward Jason. Once next to him, she looked into his eyes and whispered, "Do you know how much I want to tell you right now? How long have I waited for you to notice me? I've endured your friends' taunts, your condescending attitude toward me, as if I were a juvenile who couldn't be taken seriously. And now you're just offering to be your girlfriend. How do I know tomorrow it won't be another joke to amuse my friends?" "Ashley, what are you talking about? Yeah, there was a time when I made fun of you, but this is serious. I really want you to be my girlfriend, and I promise that no one will hurt you now." Ashley smiled, waved, and headed home. Jason didn't stop her. Once inside, the girl was greeted by Mary's mother, who saw who was seeing her daughter off. Mary asked how the ball had gone, but all she heard in response was, "Fine." The woman came over and hugged her daughter gently, but Ashley suddenly snuggled into her shoulder and cried. Mary held her tighter against her, and when she calmed down a little, she said softly, "Jason's been paying attention to you. And you don't believe him? Or is there another reason you're crying?" For you, Jason was like conquering a summit. Ashley was going for it. And this is the finale. What's he got going for him? Mammoth, what are you saying? I really love Jason. What finale? Ashley shouted indignantly and broke free from her mother's embrace. It was at that moment that the mother realized that her daughter had actually fallen in love with the guy. The woman only softly mouthed in response, "That's how you know what the feeling is. Look, just don't lose your head." The next day, Jason met Ashley after school and then walked her home. And from that day on, the two began to see each other differently. They tried to meet at every spare moment to be together. A month later, Jason confessed his love for the girl. Time passed, and Jason graduated from high school, after which he was soon drafted into the army. Ashley knew perfectly well that the lover initially wants to serve, wait until he turns 18, and after that to sign. The girl was not against the decision of the chosen one. Especially the decision of the guy pleased Jason's parents and Ashley's mother, who wanted the young people not to hurry with a trip to the registry office. Jason served and returned home. He enrolled in college and Ashley was in the 11th grade. Young people continued to meet and dream that soon they would become a married couple, which soon happened. As soon as the girl graduated from high school and she turned 18, the couple legalized the relationship. Ashley enrolled in college at the commodity manager. The newlyweds moved in with Mary. The woman insisted on it. Life itself slowly flowed further. Initially graduated from the school Jason, who got a job immediately on specialty. Afterward, Ashley received a specialty. She, too, got a job. Now the young woman dreamed that they had a child. But several years passed, and she could not get pregnant. Ashley became anxious about it. She was examined, as well as her husband, and soon Ashley received the verdict that she and her husband had different Rh factors, and it would be difficult to conceive a child. The doctor also added, in your case, getting pregnant under this circumstance will not be easy. I can add that the probability of conceiving a baby is equated to 20% out of 100. However, you can do IVF. That is my advice to you. Ashley was dumbfounded by the doctor's news, but she didn't lose hope and offered her husband to do the required procedure. The young woman piously believed that her spouse would agree to it. But Jason took the proposal of his wife in the bayonet. The man responded by saying everything should be like a normal married couple, without the intervention of any newfangled procedures. Ashley had a hard time with her spouse's answer, but she didn't want to contradict it. She still hoped that the doctors might have made a mistake. The young woman had even enrolled in medical school by correspondence. Ashley now wanted to become a midwife to figure out for herself why she could not get pregnant from her loved one. However, due to the fact that the lady could not conceive a child, scandals began to occur in the family. Jason, if initially veiledly accused his wife that she could not have children, then soon began to openly accuse the chosen one that she was empty. All the excuses of Ashley, who said that she could not get pregnant not only because of her fault, were reduced to zero. Jason blamed only his wife. Soon the man began to stay late at work. Ashley was worried, nervous. She did not want to lose her favorite person. However, family life imperceptibly shipwrecked, and one day Jason came home and began to pack his things. Ashley watched her husband in silence at first, and then she mumbled, "What are you doing? Can't you see? I'm leaving you. I have a woman. I'm sorry, she's expecting a baby. You have to realize we're not right for each other. It happens. I'm sorry. But we've only been together 4 years. Other couples have been together for decades and they don't have kids. And then a baby is born. Maybe you're right. But there's one thing. There's another woman expecting a baby from me, and she doesn't have to wait 10 years to get pregnant. Ashley and Jason should get a divorce, as each of them would be better off with a separate life. I'm sorry, but I have to explain to you the simple truth when you yourself understand everything perfectly well," the woman replied quietly, realizing that it was pointless to hold her husband back. He had made up his mind. Ashley looked sadly at her spouse after these words and left the house. She didn't want to see the man she loved packing his things to leave for good, which soon happened. A month passed after Jason left his wife. During that time, he came to Ashley's house only once to pick up the rest of his belongings and to tell her that he had filed for divorce. Ashley took it calmly, realizing that nothing could be changed. She only wished her ex-husband a happy farewell. Time passed. 3 years passed after the divorce. During this time, Ashley graduated from medical school, got a job in a hospital. Personal life of a young woman did not add up, although representatives of the stronger sex tried to look after her. However, Ashley was indifferent to the attention of men. Her mother was worried about this and repeatedly said, "Daughter, you can't do this. You do not think about your personal life. So many years have passed after the divorce, and you do not even want to accept the courtship of a decent man. I'm talking about The ex-spouse had simply packed up and disappeared from her life. The woman only heard news about him from his sister. Thinking about it, Ashley smiled sadly, which didn't escape her new acquaintance. "Why are you sad?" "I guess I'm not a good conversationalist," he said. "It's all right. We're almost there. Now you need to turn into the alley, and there you will find the right house. We are happy to help you. Let's say goodbye." "Wait, I'm not ready to let you go right away," Jason said. "Why don't you let me meet you? Or is there another way? I'll have fun now, and then you can take me to a better cafe where we can continue talking. I have to work today and I'm a little tired." "Yes, and you from the road need a break." "Whatever you say," Ashley said. "Let me give you my phone number and we'll call tomorrow and you can tell me where to go. One more thing. Why don't we go back to being on a first-name basis?" "Okay," she replied politely, then dictated her phone number and waved her hand to her new acquaintance. She turned around and hurried home. When Ashley got home, her mother came to her and anxiously asked why she was late after work. The woman hugged her mother affectionately and told her about the encounter. "Honey, what's wrong with you?" Mary exclaimed fearfully. "Were you sensible when you went with a stranger alone to see him off? What if this man was a criminal, and it was a planned operation to rob you, or even worse?" "Mom, don't panic," Ashley stopped her. "We live in the 21st century. First of all, I'm not beautiful enough to make a man want me at first sight. Second, I don't look like I have a lot of money. You can see it in my clothes. I don't wear brand name clothes. And third, Jason doesn't look like a gangster. I hope you're convinced by my arguments." Still, it was reckless. Mary sighed. "Promise me you won't do it again." "I will, Mommy," she said with a smile and hugged her mother. A few days later, Ashley met with Jason. The couple chose a small, cozy cafe to talk. The young people made an order, and then Jason asked her how things were going on the personal front. She laughed contagiously when she heard the question, and Jason was puzzled by it. "Your question about my personal life was inappropriate for the situation," Ashley explained. "If I had a boyfriend or was married, would I be sitting with you right now? Of course not. Let's just say that I was married at one time. But it didn't work out for the same reasons you are. We drifted apart. So I'm waiting for my prince to appear on the horizon. Could that be you?" "I don't know. It's too early to tell," Jason said. "It's only the second time we've seen each other. And we don't know each other. I want to tell you right away that I'm not going to get you into bed right now. Sex isn't the most important thing to me when I'm with a woman. Although I don't deny that it's important too." "That's honesty," Ashley said thoughtfully and turned the conversation to another direction. After that date, the couple began to call and see each other frequently. 2 months after meeting Jason, Ashley introduced him to her mother. Mary was charmed by her daughter's gallant suitor and informed Ashley about it. "I like Jason myself. I think I'm in love." "That's wonderful." Her daughter smiled. "Has he proposed yet?" "No, he just said that I was his one and only. But you know that men are ready for beautiful words just to get into bed. I'm more interested in actions, not sweet talk." "Then I'll talk to him about it," Mary decided. "But don't do that. I'm going to be 30 in a couple years. Do you want to organize my personal life for me?" Mary smiled at her daughter's words. She didn't say anything in response. However, the older woman took it upon herself to talk to Jason about it. When Jason came to visit again, the landlady offered to have a private conversation with her under a plausible pretext. Jason was surprised by Mary's request. Soon the older woman and the man were sitting in the kitchen while Ashley ran to the store at that moment. Mary had specifically asked her daughter to go get the hammer so she could be alone with Jason. And as soon as Ashley closed the door behind her, The lady of the house asked. "Man, are you going to live your life as a guest? I mean, do you intend to marry your daughter? Are you just going to take me on like that?" Jason replied, bewildered, not expecting a conversation on the subject. In the meantime, Mary asked tricky questions that were directed in one direction only when Jason would propose. Jason's answers were slurred. Then he rose abruptly from his chair and said firmly, "I love your daughter, but can she and I decide when we should marry? I respect you, but I just didn't want to be told what to do and when to do it. Jason, I'm not interfering with your relationship. It's just that you're not seeing the basics. You don't see Ashley changing from the unknown. I get the impression that your daughter is beginning to doubt your feelings for her." "Are you serious?" Jason asked, puzzled. "I couldn't be more serious. You talk to her about marriage, and then you'll understand," she said with a sad smile. A few days passed after that conversation. Mary was glowing in the kitchen. She knew that today her daughter should come with her boyfriend after work. The older woman cooked pilaf that day and pondered how much longer it would take Jason to propose. The landlady had set a table in the hall. She didn't like to huddle in the kitchen when guests came over. At the moment, Jason was still a guest to her, since he was not a groom. Mary put the plates on the table as she heard the front door open. The woman hurried into the hallway, where she saw her daughter entering with Jason. The man politely greeted the lady of the house and then handed a bouquet of scarlet roses with the words, "I have proposed to Ashley and she has agreed to be my other half. Now it's up to you. We want to hear you say your blessing." "Who else among us is taking the bait?" said the old woman with a grin in response. She winked conspiratorially at the man, which embarrassed him, for he remembered that he had recently addressed that word to the lady of the house. Meanwhile, Mary smiled cordially and said, "Of course I bless you. You young people have pleased me today. I hope that soon I will hear the guests shouting bitter." "You won't hear that, because we will quietly sign without any celebration. We're not 18 years old enough to have a big party," Ashley said quietly, glancing at the groom as if to suggest that he agree with her. Jason did. Soon the marriage took place. Jason came to live with his wife. Ashley was happy that she had found her happiness as a woman because she truly loved Jason. Her husband reciprocated. Mary, looking at the newlyweds, only wished them long happiness and health. Imperceptibly after the wedding, 2 years flew by. The couple occasionally had a few misunderstandings between them, but it concerned all everyday things, something Ashley didn't have time to do around the house or Jason. And at such times the couple expressed their discontent with each other. But such spats were settled the same day, and the couple went to bed reconciled. Ashley was satisfied with everything in her life except one thing: she couldn't get pregnant. Every day she called herself an outcast more and more often. One day, coming home after her shift, she walked into her bedroom, threw herself on the bed, and burst into bitter tears. Her mother came to the crying and sat down next to her daughter. The elderly woman guessed the cause of her tears. She stroked her daughter's head affectionately and said quietly, "Why are you getting upset? Don't cry, my girl. Apparently it's not yet your time to be a mom." "What are you talking about? What time is it?" "I'm already 30. Soon I won't even know what pregnancy is. I know labor is when a baby is born. But what if my husband comes a year from now and tells me he has a woman expecting a child with him? I've been there before. What do you say to that, Mom?" "First of all, calm down. Don't think about your ex-husband. He probably didn't love you enough to look outside of you. And as for Jason, he's not that kind of man. Jason loves you. I can see the way he looks at you and would do anything to make you happy with him. If he's willing to do anything, why not get checked out by the doctors? I've told him that more than once, and Jason just looks at me with sadness," Ashley tearfully told her mother. "He looks that way because it's impossible to talk to you about this topic. Jason actually wants to get a checkup. There's nothing wrong with his health, but he's not talking about it for one reason only. Jason's worried that you're stressing yourself out about not being pregnant. That's your reason. Think about it. Why is your husband keeping quiet about the checkup? Ashley stopped crying after her mother's words and thought for a moment. She was silent for a while, thinking about what she had heard, and then she turned to her mother, suddenly buried her face in her chest and said quietly, "You can't imagine how bitter I feel now. I thought I was suffering alone, but it turns out that you are also worried about me. And also, Mom, it's getting harder for me to go to work every day." Let's take today's case, for example. We had a young girl admitted a few days ago. She just turned 18. She gave birth to a boy today. And now she's giving up her son because her boyfriend doesn't want children. You know how jealous I am. You can't even imagine. She's lucky enough to be a mom, even in a situation where her boyfriend doesn't want kids. I'd have a baby if I were her. I'd give the guy my resignation. That's what I told her today. But she told me to stay out of her personal life. Daughter, don't try that girl's situation on yourself. You have your life, she has hers. Now try to just calm down or Jason will come over and worry about you. Okay, thanks for the support. I needed it, her daughter said quietly. Life slowly moved on. It had been 3 years since Ashley's wedding. The woman no longer hoped that she would ever become a mother, but she still had that hope in her heart. However, Ashley did not say it out loud. On the contrary, she told her husband more and more often that their family was incomplete. These statements only caused Jason more heartache, for he knew how much she dreamed of having children. When the conversation about the family being incomplete, Jason couldn't stand it and angrily asked his wife to shut up. Ashley, hearing her husband's tone, was frightened, because in such a way her husband had never allowed her to talk to him like that. When Ashley's first shock passed, the woman said, "All this is because I can't give you an heir. Stop it, please. That's not what I'm tired of. It's that you're making an issue out of the wrong place. I understand that you dream of having a child, as every woman does. But why do you keep talking about it? We've only been living for 3 years, which means we have to wait a while longer." Before the husband could finish his sentence, he was angrily interrupted by his wife. "Shut up. My first husband said the same thing to me." And what happened in the end? He found a woman who bore him a son. He didn't cheat while he was still married, all because I couldn't get pregnant. And that was the only reason I went to medical school, to become a midwife back in the day. To find out the real reason why I couldn't have children. Wait, but you told me that your divorce was because, as they say, you didn't get along. I lied. And now you know the truth and you can roll. I'm not holding you, Ashley yelled hysterically. She was about to throw their family picture at her husband as her mother Mary entered the room. Mary gave her daughter a stern look and then quietly asked Jason to leave. The man didn't object and complied with his mother-in-law's request. Once the older woman was alone with her daughter, she sat up to Ashley and spoke softly. "Aren't you ashamed of throwing a tantrum here? I understand that you're nervous, but what does this have to do with your husband? You're torturing yourself and him. Do you want that? Enjoy your life. You love each other, and you'll still have a daughter, take my word for it." "But when, Mom?" "I said she will, so she will. We just have to be patient." I've heard those words many times before. How long do I have to wait? The gynecologist told me that everything is fine with my husband's health too. But I'm still not getting pregnant after saying that. Ashley abruptly got up from the couch and ran out of the room. Immediately she ran into her husband Jason, who was looking at her with a sad look. The woman walked briskly toward the exit. Jason wanted to follow, but his mother-in-law stopped him, saying, "Don't follow Ashley. Let her get some fresh air, let her calm down. And in a motherly way, I suggest you go to church with your wife and pray. Ashley's already been there. I suggest you both go." Trust me, Jason, it won't cost you anything. Okay, Mary, Jason replied. Some time passed. Ashley was at work in a pensive mood. The woman's thoughts were preoccupied with the fact that her menstrual cycle had gone astray. Ashley's pensive mood was noticed by the doctor on duty and asked what was going on with her. Ashley was embarrassed by the question but still told what was bothering her. The medical officer laughed upon hearing the answer and said reproachfully, "I marvel at you, woman. Take you at least, Ashley. Where do you work?" "In a maternity hospital. A midwife." "Exactly. When symptoms like these arise, where should a woman go? And given that you're also a medical professional, what are your thoughts?" "Okay. You don't have to answer that. I can see by the look on your face that the answers to the questions have occurred to you. Let's go. I'd better check you out." After a while, Ashley came out in a happy mood. The doctor informed her that she was pregnant. Upon learning the wonderful news, Ashley immediately called her spouse and then her mother. Soon she was registered at the antenatal clinic. The woman spent the first trimester in the hospital. Then the pregnancy developed without complications. And soon Ashley gave birth to a baby girl at term. The newly married parents named their daughter Amber. The couple was in the seventh heaven of happiness that they had a child. Rejoiced at this event and Ashley's mother. The woman immediately noticed that after the birth of her daughter, as if blossomed. This was noticed not only by Mary but also by neighbors, who at every opportunity said to the elderly woman how Ashley has become more beautiful after the birth of her daughter. She's glowing from the inside out with happiness. "We're so happy for you." "Thank you," Mary replied, and immediately recited the Lord's Prayer to herself. The old woman was afraid that with such words people might inadvertently jinx her daughter's happiness. Meanwhile, Ashley was enjoying her new role as a mom. She enjoyed fussing with her baby, singing songs, putting on her baby's cradles, feeding her baby formula from a bottle. Ashley did her best to take care of her daughter, which sometimes frustrated her mother. Mary also wanted to nurse her granddaughter, so she would occasionally say to her daughter with a sad smile, "You're like a hen. You don't let anyone near you. And I am not a stranger to the baby. I want to babysit the baby too." "Oh, Mom, Amber is my little angel. And I'm just afraid to part with her even for 5 minutes," Ashley replied. Time passed and the girl turned 3. Mary started talking about putting Amber in kindergarten. Ashley immediately flatly refused the offer, which caused her mother's bewilderment. The old woman looked at her daughter with incomprehension and said that the child needed to start contact with her peers. Ashley, hearing her mother's words, replied that she would go with her daughter to the playground where the kids were walking. Mary did not insist any further, realizing that Ashley would not be persuaded. After that conversation, a couple months flew by. Ashley walked with Amber in the public garden. The woman watched her daughter. "You know, I agree with that. Mary is retiring soon. Her allowance will be small. Our family budget is going to become quite paltry, and we need to repair the roof its finances. If you get a job, we'll have extra income," Ben reasoned. A couple weeks later, Amber was enrolled in kindergarten, and Ashley went straight to work. At first, Amber was cranky and refused to go to daycare, complaining about her stomach or her leg. Lily believed it at first, but then realized that her daughter was being sly to avoid going to daycare. Ashley had a hard time convincing Amber to attend. When Amber stopped being cranky, other problems began. Caregivers complained about her behavior, saying she was acting arrogant and hurting other children. Ashley gave her daughter educational talks, but the complaints continued. Once again, when Ashley came to pick up Amber, the kindergarten teacher said Amber is an insufferable child. She doesn't get enough belt training. "What did you say? With a belt? Are you out of your mind? You have a teacher's education." Ashley was outraged. "How can you even mention the belt? I'm doing preventive counseling with my daughter at home. But you, too, should be helping me so that the girl adapts to her peers. Talk to the child and tell her that what she's doing is wrong. And if you and I do not find a common language, then I will have to appeal to your management." After this conversation between Ashley and the teacher, the complaints stopped, and after a while Amber was eager to go to kindergarten. Life slowly moved on. Ashley now dreamed of having a second child. She wanted to give her husband an heir. However, time passed, and the woman could not get pregnant. One evening, Ashley talked to her mother and said that she dreamed of having a second child. Mary sighed sadly after her daughter's words and sadly said, "I'll let you in on a secret. Basically, Amber is your only child, and there won't be any others." "Why is that?" "It's because we're on our third generation of having only one child. And it's necessarily a girl. That was my grandmother's, then my mom's, and then mine. I wanted to have at least 3 too, but God gave me only you. It's an ancient prejudice. You could say it's a coincidence, though. Don't take hope away from me. I'm bound to have more." "I'm sorry, daughter. I probably shouldn't have told you that. I don't want to take away your dream. I just thought you should know about it." The older woman sighed heavily and actually regretted her words. Time moved on imperceptibly, and it was about to be her 6th birthday when suddenly Mary felt sick. The woman was washing dishes in the kitchen when she felt a severe headache. The pensioner, writhing from the spasm, hurried to the kitchen cabinet, which stored medicines. However, the woman did not have time to get a pill, as she lost consciousness. Mary Ashley discovered Mary when she returned from daycare with her daughter. The woman, seeing her mother lying on the floor, cried out desperately and rushed to her mom. Amber, hearing her mom scream, cried frightened. Meanwhile, Ashley tried to bring the pensioner to her senses, but she was unsuccessful, and then she called an ambulance. Soon Mary was hospitalized. Ashley waited for the hospital with visits. She wanted to know what was wrong with her mother. When the woman went to the doctor once again, the doctor quietly said the cancer is brain cancer. "I can't say anything else, as I am not a specialist in this case. I have other specifics. You need to get to a specialized clinic as soon as possible." "How so?" whispered the woman, who couldn't believe what the medical professional had just told her. That same evening, Ashley told her spouse about everything. The couple began to consider where they could find a decent amount of money to travel to the regional city. Ben suggested taking out a loan, but his wife didn't refuse. Soon Mary was taken to the regional city by her daughter. The elderly woman lay for a while in the hospital, and then Ashley came for her, who hoped that everything was not so terrible. However, the doctor's words shocked her. Stage 4. So what's wrong with that? It's not like it's a verdict. People live at this stage. You told me you're a medical professional. It's not for me to tell you what stage 4 is. Yes, people live at that stage, but the only question is how long they live. There's one thing I don't understand about your situation. How could you, a medical professional, allow your mother to have such a neglected disease? Mom rarely complained of headaches, and if she did say she had a headache, she added that it was the magnetic storms. They affect her that way, Ashley replied, hiding her face in her palms and crying desperately. The doctor put his arm around the visitor and said, "I understand your condition, but you should pull yourself together now, as you need to go to your mom. And I don't think Mary will be happy when she sees her daughter crying." "Wait, shouldn't we go to the Capitol?" The man in the white coat looked sadly at the lady, then shrugged his shoulders. And then the doctor went to the table, where there was a decanter, and poured water into a glass. And only after a few moments the visitor uttered, "Hope dies last." It's a folk saying. If it makes you feel better, go to Washington. They have better equipment there. But I'm not sure they'll give you a cure that'll get your mom back on her feet in no time. If I were you, personally, I would spend the money not to buy expensive drugs that won't help, but to make my mom's last days happy. Knew what she wanted and would fight to fulfill mom's dream. And if mom asks to prolong her life, Then how would you fulfill your mom's wish? Ashley asked in a low voice and looked at the doctor point blank. The man hummed uncertainly, and after a few seconds he said, "I'd buy regular vitamins at the drugstore and give them to my mom. But at the same time I would tell her that these vitamins prolong life." "But you would not fulfill your mother's wishes, but only make an appearance. Sometimes the appearance is life-extending." Soon the lady picked up her mother from the hospital and came home with her. The woman told her husband about the conversation with the doctor, as well as the desire to go to Washington, to which the spouse replied, "Don't you think the doctor was right when he said that the capital is unlikely to help anymore? You watch TV and see when celebrities are diagnosed with cancer, and public people spend fabulous money. And what's the result? Are you saying we should just give up and watch Mom go quietly to the grave?" "I'm not saying that. Don't twist my words. I'm just trying to make the point that Mary should be at home, not in a hospital room. I don't know how much longer my mother-in-law has left to live, but I'd like her to feel peaceful and uncomfortable." "All right, so be it." Mary lived only 2 months after her hospitalization. It happened early one morning when the sun was just coming out. The daughter, who had been sleeping with her mother lately, found out that the person she loved was no longer in the world. At first, Ashley felt guilty for not realizing in time when her mother complained of headaches. Ben tried to reason with his wife to stop tormenting herself. However, after such support, the woman went into a screaming fit. And when once again Ashley blamed herself for not looking after her mother, the head of the family said, "You're getting paranoid. Stop being hysterical and let it go. Don't you realize you're becoming toxic? It's all because of your speculation. You're not just hurting yourself, you're hurting me and my daughter. You don't understand anything. I'm a medical professional, and I should have responded to Mom's complaints. And I didn't. And as a result, Mom is no longer alive. It's my fault she passed away so early. Oh, honey, you're really getting on my nerves. Why don't you stop beating yourself up? I think you should take a vacation with your daughter right before Amber starts first grade. Get some rest and relaxation. I'd go with you, but I don't have vacation until October. What do you think of my offer?" asked the husband and hugged his wife, who was still sobbing. The woman only nodded in response. She no longer had the strength to argue with her husband. Soon Ashley and her daughter left on a trip to the Gulf Coast. The woman was glad that Ben had insisted on the trip. Ashley spent a week at the sea with her daughter, and now it was the last day. Before leaving, Amber asked her mom to go to the beach one last time to admire the sea. Ashley did not refuse the child, and soon mother and daughter were already walking barefoot on the soft golden sand. Every now and then the girl ran to the water to touch the water with her toe. Ashley was watching her daughter when someone called her name. The woman looked back in bewilderment and saw her ex-husband Jason walking toward her. Ashley stared at him in amazement. Jason approached the woman and said hello in a friendly manner before mouthing, "Taking a vacation. I heard from my sister that you have a daughter. Congratulations, you've been dreaming of having kids." "Thank you. So many years have not seen each other, although we live in the same city. But we met at the sea. Listen, let's go sit in a cafe and talk. You and I have a lot to remember. You haven't changed a bit since the baby was born. You're just as petite as before. I'd love to reminisce with you about our pranks in bed. Thank you for the invitation, but I must refuse you. My daughter and I are leaving today, and you'd be better off with your wife, because I have a man I love, and I'm not attracted to the side, unlike you," Ashley replied softly, disgusted by her ex-husband's tone about intimacy. Meanwhile, Jason frowned and said wistfully, "We're not making love to my wife right now. She's 2 months away from giving birth, and she's blown to smithereens. I told my husband to terminate the pregnancy. After all, there are already 2 children, and she said that she will give birth to a third. So it's wonderful that you have so many children. Children are happiness. But I just don't understand why you walk on the beach without your soulmate and children. My wife's at home, and I'm here on business. Like on a business trip. My father-in-law's a businessman. So he sent me down here for a couple days. Well, good luck with your business. We should get going with our daughter, Ashley said quietly and beckoned her daughter over to her. The woman took the girl's hand and they headed towards the exit of the beach. Ashley walked at that moment and thought how lucky Jason's wife was to already have 2 children and to be carrying a baby under her heart at this time. Soon Ashley and her daughter arrived home. They were gushing over Ben about what a wonderful time they had. Amber took a handful of sand out of her backpack to make her daddy happy. Ashley laughed when she saw it. Her husband looked at his wife in bewilderment, but she was even more amused when she saw Ben's amazed face. When the first emotions from the sand had passed, Ashley explained the reason for her laughter. She told her husband that she had hidden something in her backpack the night before she left. Ashley hadn't thought much of it at the time, but as she put her daughter's backpack on her shoulders, she wondered why it was so heavy. Ben, still not realizing anything, looked into his daughter's backpack and immediately chuckled, and through a fit of laughter turned to his daughter. "You wanted so much to please Daddy that you stuffed the whole backpack with sand. That's a good girl to please your father. So you were sunbathing in the sun like me and Mom. And now you can fill a trough with water, pour sand on the ground next to it. And it's like you're having a vacation at the sea. It's great, isn't it? You're so good at it." "That's a wonderful idea. And Jackson, sunshine, Daddy will give you a kiss for being clever." Life moved on, and soon it was time to go to first grade. On the eve of that event, Ashley put her daughter to bed and headed into the hall to iron her white apron. She spread the bedspread on the board, and then laid the apron down thoughtfully and spoke softly. "How quickly time runs. You too. Our daughter is going to first grade tomorrow. As my mother used to tell me, it's worth it for a child to go to school, then time will fly by after that imperceptibly." "Is that you talking to yourself?" pronounced Ben, who had just entered the room and heard his spouse's phrase. "I'm saying that you and I are getting a little old now. And you know, my mom was right when she said that all women in our line give birth to only 1 child. And it's always a girl. Oh, that's so lucky. You and me were in the prime of our lives. And as for the 1-child thing, that's just prejudice. That's what I told my mother. But you see, I can't get pregnant again." "That's all right. We still have a whole cartload of time. Drop what you're doing and let's go into the bedroom to make a baby," Ben said and winked excitedly at his spouse. Ashley smiled and said, "I was having a serious conversation with you." "And you're at it again?" "I'm being quite serious too. And about the kids, I can only say this: we have a daughter. And we should be happy about it. We need to get Amber on her feet so she can go to school and get a good life in the future." And so Amber has already started first grade. Her mother and father alternately took her daughter to and picked her up from school. The girl studied willingly, and soon parents often heard praise from the class teacher. Ashley and her husband were only happy. The first half of the year flew by. Amber became friends with a classmate. The girl's name was Christina. Friends spent a lot of time together. The parents of the girls were only happy about this friendship, which did not affect the performance at school. And now it was spring. The time of summer vacation was approaching. Amber came home alone. She had already been released to school alone after the winter. The girl came home and went to her room without greeting her mother, who was busy in the kitchen. Ashley was curious as to why her daughter had done that. The woman wiped her hands on a towel and proceeded to the nursery, where she saw her upset daughter. The homeowner approached the girl and asked what had happened. Amber glanced glumly at her mom and immediately, almost tearfully, said, "Christina. Her parents bought her rollerblades, as well as a helmet, elbow pads, and knee pads. I want to go rollerblading in the summer too. And what are you getting upset about? Daddy will come over and talk to him about it. It's all words. Dad already promised me a bicycle. And what? He bought a junk bike. It's a shame to even ride it in the yard. Dad bought me the bike I pointed out in the store, and then suddenly I needed another one. He said, ride this one first, and then you can get another bike. I don't need a bike now. I want rollerblades. In the evening, Ben came home from work, as his daughter immediately ran up to him and asked him to buy rollers. The head of the family, after a little thought, promised his daughter to make the purchase. Ashley heard the answer. The spouse did not interfere in the conversation between father and daughter. However, when Amber went to bed, Ashley emphatically stated that she was against the purchase. Ben looked at his wife in amazement and asked, "Why do you disapprove of rollerblading?" "She's too young for the sport. Amber is a girl, not a boy. It's more appropriate for her to play with her dolls, not run around on those rollerblades like tomboys everywhere." "Wait, honey, you know what kids are like these days. Girls only play dolls in kindergarten, and once they go to school, their priorities change. And anyway, how can you imagine our daughter's friend rollerblading and Amber looking at her with envy? It's a very interesting picture. And if Christina bought a live tiger tomorrow, would you run out and buy that animal for your daughter too? Why make it so complicated?" "Okay, if you promised your daughter, then buy the rollers. But I warn you right away that you will walk with Zlata when she starts to learn to ride them." "Whatever you say, my queen. Imagine how happy that would be for a woman. By the way, I forgot to ask, what did you cook?" "Flotsam pasta is my specialty. You know very well that cooking is not my business. That's what I have you for. Now you tell me how your day at work went." Ashley looked lovingly at her husband. Then she told him that she'd had a hard day at work. He asked why it had been tiring at work. Ashley smiled and said, "Although it's a hard day, it's a joyful one. A woman gave birth to triplets today. Imagine. She's 38 years old and this is her first labor. You should have seen this woman in labor when she was given her first baby in her arms. That woman's eyes were full of happiness. That's the first time I've seen eyes like that in so many years. And the funniest thing is that when she was transferred from the labor room to the ward, she began to wonder how she would feed 3 babies because she had only 2 breasts. Our medical staff, everyone who was in the ward, just fell down laughing. They found something to laugh about. If I were a woman, I might be interested in that question too. Although, I admire our woman in labor because she gave birth at 38. And you've given up on the whole thing. We should do the same thing tonight, as soon as we put our daughter to bed. And maybe don't even hint to me that you had a hard day's work or a headache. You won't get away from me today," he said with a smile. "Let's go home then. Can't wait to taste your specialty," said the wife with a laugh and took her husband under her elbow. And so it was already the end of August. School was a few days away. Amber walked up to her mom and asked to go for a walk. Ashley had the day off today. She glanced out the window and then turned to her daughter. "It's okay to walk, but just no rollerblades." Amber frowned and immediately inquired, "Why no rollerblades?" "The weather's turning bad. It's supposed to rain. Maybe you and Christina can sit with us today and play on the laptop," Mom replied. So much for Mom's idea. There were only a few days left until school started, and then there would definitely be no time to go for a ride. "Mom, let me go. Christina and I will skate carefully, as always." "Mom, you're the best in the world. My favorite. You know I can't refuse you when you ask me to. Go on, take a walk," said the woman and kissed her daughter on the top of her head. As soon as the girl jumped out of the door, the woman felt a vague uneasiness in her soul. Ashley was about to run out after her daughter and call her home when her cell phone rang. The woman was distracted by the phone call and then went out into the yard. but her daughter was not there, of course. It had been about 2 hours since Amber had gone for a walk. Ashley still felt a heaviness in her soul. The woman dialed her daughter and asked how they were doing. Amber cheerfully replied that everything was fine and immediately disconnected the connection. Hearing her daughter's voice made Ashley feel a little calmer. Another hour passed before Amber left for her walk. Ashley started the laundry. She pulled out her daughter's terrycloth robe as there was a loud knock on the door. At the same time, the woman heard Christina crying. Ashley hurried to the door, and as soon as she opened it, she saw Christina's crying face. The landlady asked anxiously, "What happened?" "Amber was hit by a car," she said through her sobs. "I came straight to you." "What do you mean, hit by a car? What are you talking about? Where's Amber?" "They took her away in an ambulance," Christina said through sobs. Ashley sucked in air with her mouth and then asked the girl where it had happened. When she found out where the hit and run had happened, the woman rushed to the scene of the tragedy without changing her slippers. When she got there, she saw a small crowd of gawkers, as well as a cordon of the place on the stretch of road. The woman, pushing people, rushed to the place. As soon as she got there, she saw the chalked silhouette of a child on the pavement, as well as brown bloodstains. Not far away, Ashley spotted a helmet. The helmet belonged to her daughter, and at the same moment, the woman lost consciousness. Ashley woke up in the hospital. Sitting next to her was her husband, Ben, who was holding her hand. As soon as Ben saw that his wife came to her senses, he immediately jumped up and ran out into the hallway, where he loudly called a nurse. A girl in a white coat hurried into the room. She approached Ashley and asked how the woman was feeling. Ashley waved her hand and wanted to get up. Her husband wouldn't let her. Then the woman asked her spouse, "What about your daughter?" "She's alive. Amber's in the ICU. The doctors are fighting for her life. Help me up. I need to be near my daughter. My presence will help her." "You just had a heart attack, and you can't get up," Ben said quietly but firmly. He wanted to add something else, but at that moment the doctor entered the room and came up to Ashley and said, "Are you awake? That's great. You're going to be given an injection, and then try to sleep. I'm not going to be here. Let's get you the papers you need to sign to refuse hospitalization." "Ashley, do I really need to tell you as a medical professional what the consequences of refusing medical care are?" The man in the white coat said sternly. "That's exactly what I know. That is why you should not waste your precious time now and explain to me the plain truths which I already know without you." The doctor looked at Ben after the woman's words, but he only waved his hands, thus making it clear that he could not influence his spouse in this situation. And after a while, Ashley was near the entrance to the intensive care unit. She prayed to God that her daughter would survive. Ben at this time stood near the window and looked at the sill with a hateful look. Some time passed. Ashley walked over to her husband and quietly touched his elbow. The husband immediately flinched at the touch and turned to his wife. He put his arm around Ashley and then pressed the woman's head against his chest and immediately felt her crying. Ben asked her to calm down, but the woman didn't respond to her husband's words. Ben became nervous. He was worried that his wife might have a second stroke. The man wanted to run after the nurse, as he was stopped by his spouse, who faintly said, "Tell me what happened." "I can't tell you much." Anyway, the girls were already rollerblading home. They needed to pass the zebra. As here Christina had a slip on her lap, she bent down to correct it, and her daughter at the same time moved across the road, and then a foreign car flew out. Amber didn't have time to react and a hit and run occurred. Christina was saved from the collision by her knee pads. Witnesses called an ambulance and police officers. The investigator told me the driver fled the scene. but he's already been arrested. He was under the influence of alcohol when he hit our daughter. Ben was silent, looked at his wife, who only clenched her hands in a fist. The woman's face had gone pale. Ashley didn't say anything. She just stood there staring at one point. The man did not know how to behave in this situation, so once again pressed his wife to him and gently said, "Everything will work out, and our daughter will still recover." "I want that bastard to get the maximum punishment," Ashley told him. "That criminal will get what he deserves. Right now, I think you should go home so you can recover." "No home, our little girl needs us here." "Okay, sweetheart." It was another couple hours before 2 doctors came out of the ICU. Ashley rushed over to them and grabbed one doctor by the chest. The man in the white coat tried to pull his hands off the woman, but he was unsuccessful. And then the second doctor turned to the lady's husband. "We did everything we could here, but the girl suffered many injuries. We couldn't save her." Ashley, as soon as she heard this, pushed the doctor away, then sobbed loudly. She then turned to her husband and started beating her fists on his chest, shouting, "It's your fault. It's your fault. I was against these videos. How am I supposed to live without my little girl?" One of the doctors quickly realized that the woman was hysterical. The man in the white coat shouted something to the nurse, who came out to the noise. The lady was given an injection and soon she fell asleep. Ben was next to his wife the whole time. And as soon as the spouse woke up, she asked to take her home. The man complied with the request without any objection. Amber's funeral soon followed. All this time Ashley was in prostration. She did not understand why so many people had come to the cemetery, and also did not realize why those present were expressing their condolences to her. It wasn't until the coffin was being lowered into the hole that Ashley realized it was her baby girl being buried. The woman shrieked, ran to the coffin, wrapped both arms around it, and screamed, "Don't. I can't let my daughter go to her final resting place alone. I want to lie next to her." From the coffin, Ashley was able to tear Ben together with her father, who came to the funeral of his granddaughter. The woman was then picked up by neighbors and hurriedly taken away from the cemetery. At home, Ashley could not sit down at the table to memorialize her daughter as she became ill with heart trouble. Her spouse called an ambulance and the woman was hospitalized. Several days passed after the funeral. Ben visited his spouse daily, although it was a long drive. "We still don't know when the trial will be. Be patient, my dear. Let's get better at my place," he told her. "Why should I get better if our daughter is no longer in this world?" Ashley replied, "I realize that we lost our only child, but don't forget that I need you, that I love you, and I can't lose you. And Amber wouldn't want that either." Some time passed. Ashley was released from the hospital and went to work. The days seemed like torture for the woman. Ashley hated the nights most of all, as sleep was non-existent. She had fleeting visions of her daughter coming to her and asking her to punish the man who hit her. Ben saw that his wife could not find peace until she knew what punishment the driver would receive, and soon the trial took place. As it turned out, that driver was some local oligarch. The defendant got off with a fine. It was twisted to mean that Amber was crossing the road in the wrong place. Amber's testimony disappeared from the case, and a whole new set of witnesses came forward. When Ashley found out about it, she went door to door with the D.A.'s office, the police, the DMV. But everywhere she was pointed at the door. The woman was desperate, and after another visit to the investigator, she came home and drank a few shots of whitewater. Ashley literally immediately became tipsy, as strong drinks were not spoiled. When her husband came home from work, her wife said to him in an inebriated voice, "How can you live peacefully in this world when our daughter is gone because of your fault? First of all, you, my dove, are drunk. Let's talk about it tomorrow when you're sober. I want to tell you everything now. You're not really a man. The man who ruined my daughter is out there, and you didn't even lift a finger to avenge him. What can I do when money rules the world now? Don't you understand that? What do you think I should do? Go to that oligarch and throw him from the 5th floor. Would that make you feel better? Only I'd have to go to jail for it, because I don't have the money to pay him off. I'd go and throw him from the 5th floor. Maybe then my daughter would stop coming to me at night. Ben did not say anything to his wife, only took the bottle of hot drink from her hands. And afterward, the man retired to the nursery to ponder how to help his wife overcome the loss of her only daughter. Sasha did not sleep all night, and the only thing that came to his mind was to take his wife to the bishop in the church, which he soon did. After the church visit, the lady was now less often visited by her daughter in dreams. Time moved on imperceptibly, and now a year has passed since Amber was buried. During this time, the lady had hardened a bit. Whereas she used to come to work in high spirits, now she disliked women in labor. The woman did not tell anyone about it. But the team has already noticed that Ashley often rudely treats future moms. The chief Dr. Jackson Michael repeatedly made his subordinate remarks on this matter. The woman promised to correct herself, but everything was repeated again. And once Ashley, together with the doctor, delivered a woman in labor. The young woman was in labor for the first time. And when the contractions began, she screamed that she was in pain. Ashley considered the future mommy hysterical, and the words of the doctor made remarks to her, and after the birth wrote a report to the chief doctor. Jackson Michael familiarized himself with the document and called Ashley to his office. As soon as the woman entered, the master of the office seriously said, "This can't go on any longer. If before, everyone wanted you to assist in childbirth, but now women in labor, just hearing your name, frightened. Maybe you should go to the sea with your husband, get away for a while. I understand your grief that you lost a child, but our patients are not to blame. Let's find some common ground, otherwise we'll go our separate ways, even though you're an excellent midwife. Now, I want an answer from you. I'm going to reconsider how I treat my patients. I'm sorry, it won't happen again." I've heard that before. Ashley, why don't you give me one last chance? Okay? You might want to think about taking a vacation. A change of scenery for a while is good for a person, especially in your situation. Ashley came home in a gloomy mood. She went into the kitchen to make dinner, but immediately changed her mind and went into the living room, where she turned on the TV. The woman didn't watch the program at all. She was thinking about how to continue going to work. Ashley was distracted from her thoughts by her husband, who sat down next to her and said affectionately, "How was your work day? A lot of women gave birth today? Why are you interested? Honey, what's the matter with you? Actually, I've always been interested in that. Then from now on, stop doing it. How I'm sick of everything. How I'm sick of everything," said the wife nervously. Ben frowned after his wife's words and then said firmly, "Tell me what happened at work." Ashley didn't talk herself into it twice, but honestly recounted the conversation with the head doctor. Ben was silent for a long time after his wife's narration, and then asked why she had developed a dislike for laboring women. Ashley thought for a moment, and then, looking her husband in the eye, confessed, "You know, I look at their happy faces when they're presented with a baby, and it's like I get an electric shock inside. And it's because they're moms. And I'm never going to get to experience that. It's moments like that when it's like I'm possessed. I can't help it. In that case, should you quit this job? You can't force yourself to do something you don't want to do. I get the impression that you've grown to hate being a midwife and find no outlet in this job." "What do you mean quit? Do you want me to sit in 4 walls and slowly go insane?" "I'm not suggesting you sit at home. You could get a job as a clerk in a small store. I think you'll be able to balance your debit and credit. Or maybe we should really go on vacation somewhere in the country, take a tent, fishing rods, and spend a week in solitude. and then think about changing jobs. Okay, let's do that, honey. Soon the couple went on vacation to Ben's father's house in the country. The couple had a great time. They often went to nature, where they fished in the lake. All right, go ahead, Taylor Grivna. You'll be running an even higher fever by the time you get home to your daughter. Just as Ashley escorted the woman out, a nurse announced that there were 2 women in labor. Ashley sighed to herself and hurried into the exam room. There was one middle-aged woman in there who had been brought in by ambulance. Ashley began to ask the patient questions in a businesslike manner. Just then, the head doctor entered the room and addressed the midwife. This is going to be fun today. You're taking care of this woman, and I'm about to have a difficult labor. Ashley sighed sorrowfully and hurried to examine the woman. As soon as she saw the patient's chart, she immediately shuddered in displeasure. The woman in labor, Rachel Lionel, was 58 years old. After all the necessary procedures, the woman in labor was taken to the labor room. Ashley was clearly giving commands as to how the patient should proceed. Rachel Lionel responded by moaning and begging for the baby to be saved. Ashley was angry with the woman, unable to suppress her anger. And when the woman in labor moaned again, the midwife said angrily, "You're crazy. How could you think of giving birth at the age of 58? Now keep quiet and do as you're told." The labor was difficult. Ashley was completely exhausted. She would have been happy to have the help of the chief of medicine. But Jackson Michael was delivering triplets, and he was having a hard time with it too. And when the workday was over, Ashley breathed a sigh of relief. Now the only thing she wanted to do was come home, take a bath, and go to bed. This day she even changed her principles. She called a cab to get to her place of residence. Previously, she had not allowed herself such expenses. Soon the woman was already at home, where she was met by her husband Ben. He offered his wife to eat, but she waved away and said that she did not want anything, as the day was stressful. Afterward, Ashley said she delivered a baby for an elderly woman. Her husband whistled in surprise and said in amazement, "I can't believe what kind of women we have here." The next day at lunchtime, Ashley received a call from the chief physician, who ordered her to report to work. The woman was often called by her superiors, so she involuntarily had a thought, and whether this call is not connected with yesterday's elderly woman in labor. There was no time to ponder, however, and Ashley drove to the hospital. As soon as she got to the second floor, where the chief physician's office was, a nurse ran up to her and whispered, "Ours is out of control, vomiting and swearing." "What's the reason?" "You know, he said something about the woman in labor yesterday." The girl in the white coat wanted to add something, but then the door opened and the head doctor appeared and said, "I was just waiting for you, Ashley. Come on, let's go have a talk." The first to enter the office was the chief physician, who stood by the desk, tapping his fingers nervously on it. Ashley came in after the man, and she knew from the doctor's demeanor that he was going to get a scolding, since he was rarely this angry. As the woman closed the door, Jackson Michael came right up to her and said sternly, "What are you doing? I am well aware that today both you and I have a day off after yesterday's duty, but I get a call from a doctor saying that a woman in labor wants to get to know me. I wouldn't have responded to this request if I hadn't been told who this woman was. Do you happen to have any idea who this woman might be?" "I do," Ashley replied. "Rachel Lionel Kopylova gave birth to a baby girl." "That's right. When I went to see her, she was curious about the midwife who delivered her baby. Naturally, I asked what was wrong. Rachel wouldn't tell me what the situation was, but it was clear she wasn't happy about what you'd done. And now I'll tell you for your understanding that this woman in labor is the wife of a very famous man in the regional city. And if now we are tortured with checks, the stumbling block will be you, because your tongue says nasty things. I'd like to add that if I fire you, your husband will get it too, and so will I for that matter." Wait a minute, Ashley said. If this lady is the wife of a respectable man, why did she come here to give birth? Why didn't she give birth in her own town? You're asking me these questions? The head doctor was indignant. You don't understand the seriousness of the situation. I'm not interested in why Rachel ended up in our hospital. Ashley was more concerned with the aftermath of her shift. She wasn't going to rant about it. You go on your knees and beg for forgiveness, birthing girl. Basically do whatever it takes to earn her favor. The doctor gestured toward the door, letting her know that the conversation was over. Ashley walked out of the office. Her face was burning. The woman didn't know how to start a conversation with the woman in labor, whom she had insulted. Nevertheless, Ashley pulled herself together and headed toward the room. She knocked on the door and then entered. Immediately, her attention was caught by the way Rachel Lionel was admiring her newborn daughter. Ashley hesitated, letting her know she was in the room. She turned at the sound and looked at the midwife intently. I want to apologize to you, Ashley spoke first. I behaved inappropriately with you yesterday. I'll get down on my knees if you want me to. But please forgive me. I didn't know whose wife you were. Don't clean it. Are you saying that if I were the wife of a locksmith or a janitor, you wouldn't feel guilty about talking to a woman in labor like that? Rachel Lionel said sternly and looked reproachfully at the midwife. Ashley at that moment was ready to fall to the ground in shame, because she realized that she had said something stupid. But she answered nonetheless. I wouldn't feel guilty. Well, thank you for your honest answer. If you lied now, I'd lose the last shred of respect for you. Now tell me, why are you so rude to women in labor? Don't deny it, since I've been doing a little checking up on you around here. Ashley looked at Rachel with a sad look, and then tears ran down her cheeks. The midwife, without knowing why, told this woman how she had lost her baby, that the perpetrator had gotten off scot-free after the hit and run, and told her that she dreamed of becoming a mom, but it wasn't happening. Therefore, when women of advanced age give birth, she is filled with anger and envy. Rachel listened attentively to the interlocutor. Then she smiled sadly. She invited the midwife to sit down next to her, then took her hand and asked her to stop crying. Ashley wiped her tears away with the palm of her hand. While smearing mascara on her face, Rachel immediately held out a damp washcloth with the words, "Are you now, like a lost sheep, aware of our fate? Related. At one time, I couldn't get pregnant for a long time either. And when it did happen, it was a miracle for me and my husband. My husband at that time was still a small official in the administration. And then my son grew up and against parental will, after serving in the army, went to the hot spot. My husband and I hoped that the trouble would pass us by. However, the miracle did not happen. Our boy died. We could not recover from this tragedy for a long time. But as they say, time heals. My husband moved up the career ladder, and that's when I had the idea that I could still have a child. I was examined in many clinics, but the doctors were throwing up their hands. And then came the decision to do IVF. My husband and I consulted. He is 7 years younger than me, and we came to a mutual agreement that we could take a risk. And the risk justified our expectations. We have a daughter. The main thing is that our health should be good. Ashley sat in silence after Rachel's story. The woman's story had touched something in her soul. Meanwhile, Jackson Michael paced nervously around the office, wondering if Ashley had made amends, and unable to bear it, the man strode into the room, where he saw a peaceful conversation between the women, who smiled at each other. The chief physician came out in bewilderment. The only thing he realized was that the conflict was over. Meanwhile, Ashley smiled embarrassedly and asked the question she had been wondering about the late pregnancy. It's understandable. I'm happy for you, but I just don't understand why you came to give birth in a provincial town. I didn't really want to come here, Rachel answered Lionel. But immediately, becoming serious, she continued. My husband went on a business trip to New York. I was against this trip, but my husband is still an enthusiast, likes to be in the know. My spouse was away for 2 days and should have been back by now. Then I got the call that he had a heart attack. I could not stay at home and drove myself by car to that city. However, the nervousness had taken its toll. I felt the baby wanted to be born. So your town, suspicious of her husband Jane, followed him to the sea. Jane tasted the newly cooked borscht, grimaced, and irritably threw the spoon into the sink. She'd oversalted it again, and the flavor is disgusting, cloying, as if it were not soup, but compote with vegetables. I feel like I'm starting to get turned on. Jane poured herself some tea, sat in a corner and stared at one point. The oversalted, sugary soup, which could only appeal to a lover of Asian cuisine, was just one more touch to the ridiculous day. Things had gone downhill from the very first morning. It started with her waking up at the crack of dawn, even though she could have slept for another 3 hours. Today it was especially annoying because it was the beginning of vacation, and there was no reason to get up at 6:30 in the morning. Besides, it was a strange peculiarity of her body that once she woke up in the middle of the night, she could never go back to sleep, no matter how hard she tried. So she spent the rest of the night lying motionless on her side of the bed, afraid of waking Jason, watching the beams of light from the car headlights moving across the ceiling with her eyes. After struggling until dawn, Jane crawled out of bed, in a state far from morning vigor, of course. She scattered a jar of cream in the bathroom, broke a fingernail, and as a crowning achievement, burned an ugly hole in her still quite decent blouse. At the sight of the wrinkled fabric, Jane honestly tried to answer herself why had she taken to ironing a blouse that was completely unnecessary now. There was no answer. Spoiled, of course, of the few things that really suited her. Having tried to negotiate with the universe by cooking borscht, which her husband Jason always called a masterpiece of cooking, and having received instead of a noble taste some brackish concoction, Jane finally realized that today was definitely not her day. There were a frightening number of days like this in her life when things didn't work out. It was time to get to the bottom of this. Sitting in her cozy little kitchen, she realized that it wasn't the carrots and beets or the old iron with the frayed heat markings. It was about her condition and mood, which were far from normal. Her thoughts habitually returned to her husband Jason. If one believes that a man plays every time he is remembered, Jason must do so continuously. For days now, she hasn't thought about anything but him and her place in his life. If, of course, she still had any place in it. Jane had strong doubts about the latter, unsupported by facts, but somehow it seemed that the facts would not be long in coming. Jane sipped her tea and shook her head. What was there to beat around the bush? At least she could tell herself the truth: Jason was cheating on her. That was for sure. To be sure, she'd just have to stop sitting in her old robe on the couch, feeling sorry for herself and marveling at his meanness. Why wouldn't you be amazed? They'd been together for 10 years. It always seemed to her that their relationship was sincere and really strong. In any case, she loved her husband, worried about him, tried to be a good wife. What was worth her feat of cooking alone? She spent years desperately injuring her fingers, once nearly lost her little finger trying to carve a chicken. She cursed the stupid human habit of eating every day, and several times. And she stocked up on food, periodically clogging the kitchen drain. It wasn't easy for her, but she succeeded. She had gone from being an inept potato masher who crumbled potatoes rather than peeled them to a master of soups and roasts in 8 years. Well, maybe not quite a master, if you're realistic. But she learned, she could, she achieved, she suffered. And then one day I heard from Jason. Jane, this is a masterpiece. Borscht. It's just like my mom's. It's even better. Because they had so many things in those almost 10 years, the good and the not so good, the sad and the funny. They really were truly together in both the joyful moments and the hard ones. Hadn't she been by Jason's side during the terrible time when his best friend, the one Jason had been friends with since childhood and thought of as a brother, had died, and he couldn't recover from the shock? Or when he'd had a fight with his boss and quit, finding himself unemployed in an instant? With a mortgage, by the way. Did she, Jane, say a word of reproach? No, she understood. She supported him. Though she'd had a few thoughts that Jason could have been less principled and kept silent where necessary. And when his inability to do anything around the house came to light, had she ever rebuked him for it? But she could. Yes, she could. Especially in the face of her own culinary successes. Jason really was a poor handyman for some reason. Although he was sincerely trying to improve. He was eager to repair appliances, clean drains, hang shelves. But after a few experiments, some of which ended in minor injuries for the master, Jane firmly decided that if there was a need to do something at home, we'll call plumbers, electricians, and furniture makers. She cares for Jason in and of itself. In fact, Jason was a virtuoso at one thing around the house. He was an excellent knife sharpener, and that talent was enough for Jane to consider her husband useful in the household. And Jason. Could she ever forget the way he had cared for her when she had slipped on the ice in the early spring and broken her leg? How much care and love had been poured into her then? No less than the fruit, seafood, nuts, and other things she'd bought. What Jason had rushed to buy and shove at Jane after learning that his beloved wife was prone to fractures. How he's hated cottage cheese since childhood, manfully eating it with her for company, feigning bliss on his face. And certainly never forget how, upon waking up on March 8th, she found her annoying cast solidly painted with daisies. They were the best flowers she had ever received in her life, and they were not overshadowed even by the incredible size of a bouquet of some unseen exotic buds. And the one thing that's still hard to remember, their dreams of children, and then at least a child. All the more everyone around them had children, one or two. Her high school friend Mary had 3, and in her favorite TV shows, everyone was fertile, and from episode to episode they were relentlessly procreating. She and Jason were the only ones who weren't doing so well. And when it suddenly became clear that she couldn't have children, or at least not in the usual way, it seemed to her that her life was over, and certainly nothing good would ever come of it again. Who better than Jason had been there for her, listening to her tantrums every second, calming her down and leading her by the hand out of the gloom she found herself in. "Are you going to leave me now?" she asked then, looking away. "Why should I?" he wondered. "Or have you found a good reason to get rid of me?" "Look, stop it. I'm serious. Why would you tie yourself to a barren woman like me?" She grinned bitterly. "I don't know. I need to think." Jason looked at her seriously. "I need to make a list of your faults and your virtues and see which is greater, and then decide." "Oh, well, it's already done." He pulled a piece of paper out of his pocket and stared at it carefully. "Well, it's a lot of faults for one man. But you know, there's one thing that outweighs them all. I love you, kid." "Well, there's a lot of other ways to do it. We'll get ready and try. At the very least, adopt." How she loved him in that moment. How do you forget the day they bought that big, expensive couch, and only after it was unloaded near the house, suddenly realized that this monster, a masterpiece of furniture craftsmanship, categorically, under no conditions and ways, does not enter the doors of their driveway. To return the sofa to the store, Jason categorically refused, stating that it was a matter of honor. Either he would defeat the couch or the couch would defeat him. And they sat in front of the amazed passers-by and neighbors in front of the driveway on their purchase, embraced, waiting for some miracle, a master, able to disassemble the purchase without damage, to drag it, finally, into the apartment. And it was one of the best evenings of their lives. Then it was one of the best nights. And another night was their first New Year's Eve as husband and wife. They were traveling by car to the country house of their friends for New Year's Eve, got completely lost in the snow-covered alleys of the old village, and finally stalled in some snowdrift. They discovered that it was a few minutes before 12. They took turns drinking champagne from the neck of the bottle, eating tangerines and looking into each other's eyes. Fluffy snowflakes quietly descended from the sky and fell on Jason's hair and shoulders, glistening on his hair. Their breath, smelling of tangerines, of wine, mingled in the frosty air. And it was the best, most fabulous night of Jane's life. Besides, right after 12, the real miracles began. The girl walking down the alley turned out to be both a good fairy and a witch. The first because she led them to the nearest house, full of people having fun, to warm themselves. And the witch because, laughing, she said that this village was called something completely different from the one they were traveling to. Soon came a slightly tipsy good wizard, who said that their car had almost turned into a pumpkin, at least as much use as they could get out of it for now. Then a whole series of transformations began, which resulted in Jane and Jason, wrapped in streamers and ribbons, being taken home in a semi-fainting state in the morning. Jason claimed that they had been taken in a sleigh pulled by a reindeer team. Jane, suffering from a terrible hangover, looked into Jason's cloudy eyes and believed even in reindeer. How many other moments could she remember that were so far away, almost forgotten, but as it turned out, carefully preserved by memory? And for the record, if anything, Jason wasn't the easiest and most unproblematic of husbands. He's got a way about him that if he were Jane, she'd have sent him away a long time ago. Take his passion for fishing and hunting. It would seem, how could a modern, quite prosperous and well-to-do man have such a passion for primitive activities? What kind of passion? To periodically break off and go to some wilderness, to sit for days in mud and water, to earn a cold, or to hook, if you are particularly lucky, a fish in one place. By the way, Jason's been lucky a couple times. And how much money is spent on these fun on spinning rods and other accessories. She'd seen for herself that it all cost Jason a lot of money when she decided to give him a real hunting bag with a nice name for his birthday. She even demanded the store to show her the best thing with the words, but only "let's not Chinese," that it should be made of genuine leather and branded. She, as they call it, played the game. When she looked at the price tag, she shuddered in surprise and, feeling the back of the mocking looks of the seller, proudly went to the cash register. Buying the game bag hadn't just consumed the entire amount she'd planned for the gift. It had wiped out her budget. Jane had been saving money for shoes. That problem was quickly solved when Jason simply bought her those shoes. The cost of the hunting equipment shocked her for a long time. But the worst part for her began if the hunt or fishing trip was successful and Jason came home with the spoils. In the hallway, scary, dirty, and unbearably smelly bags lay on the floor. The washing machine was humming, trying to deal with incredibly dirty clothes with traces of cash on them. Jane was simply afraid to go near it. After a while, she began to feel like a caveman's wife, covered in wet feathers with fish scales stuck to her feet. As a result of her torment, patience, and heroic struggle with fish and game, plates of pate or fried pieces of someone else's meat were proudly displayed on the table. "Try some, please," pronounced the prey, and looked at her with rapturous eyes. Jane, totally unaccustomed to game, opened her mouth to refuse, but looking at the man she loved, his eyes full of pride and childish hope, she suddenly caught herself feeling as if she were about to offend a child. The tasting ended with her expressions of delight and his assurances that he would try to bring more next time. She was glad they didn't live in Africa, and Jason didn't bring home, for example, a part of an elephant carcass as a trophy. Though truth be told, she wasn't a gift either. Jason could probably use a good word for her passion for orchids, for example. She really loved those beautiful flowers, which for some reason reminded her of miniature alpine perpetual snowflakes. Jane had over 40 orchids in her home collection. And Jason bravely tolerated this neighborhood. Sometimes he had to literally take a cue to the bathroom, in which delicate and capricious flowers underwent water procedures. And he was not the first in the line. Usually after 2 or 3 months and several times of fertilizer use, Jason, An allergic man would sneeze uncontrollably and deafeningly if he didn't get out of the house in time. And when he stumbled over another pot that suddenly appeared in front of him, he would freeze in fright. Almost weightless, very unstable orchid pots tipped over with surprising ease, and Jason didn't want to risk his life or his family's well-being by dropping a rare orchid from the windowsill, especially since those drops always left a trail of soil crumbs that he never managed to sweep up. Orchids, on the other hand, they stand quietly and peacefully in their places and do not scare anyone. What can't be said about her dear husband's other hobby? His obsession with hockey. This is not everyone cannot stand. Think about it. A well-mannered and polite, intelligent man, perfectly in control of himself, several times a year turns into a screaming, jumping and spewing curses and blessings abnormal. In the first year of their life together, Jane, it must be admitted, had barely made it to the end of the World Cup of Hockey, which Jason watched, of course, on television, but he was yelling so loudly that it felt like they were in the middle of an overcrowded grandstand in their apartment. Ours, to Jane's secret joy, lost in the quarterfinals, and further games were played with less fan excitement. "How often is the World Cup played?" Jane asked cautiously. "Every year." Jason rubbed his hands together, "so we'll win it back next year." How foolish she'd been to think that his powerful instincts as a game catcher were the biggest problems in their married life. He'd go somewhere far away, and then there'd be a couple days of olfactory and visual torment at most. And everything would be fine again. For 2 weeks, the house had been a sports boom in the evenings. Jason jumped up and down on the couch, ran around the apartment, ate everything he could get his hands on. As it happened, the matches were broadcast mostly at night, and Jane had to share her husband's hockey enthusiasm. As you know, if you cannot overcome the situation, change your attitude to it. Realizing that hockey, unfortunately, was becoming more important to Jason than anything else, even her hobbies, she made the straw man decision to become a part of hockey, or rather a cheerleader. After thoroughly preparing herself, reading several articles, and studying the makeup of the U.S. national team, Jane sat down next to her nervous husband late one night. "Look, what's he doing? Look. That number 5 right there. That's Nathan. He's a defender, but he's trying to play left tackle. But now he's in Martin's way," she said in an authoritative tone, looking at her dazed husband. "Look, that's right. 100% of the goal was blown. If they play like that with some Slovaks, what will happen against the Canadians? Will look ridiculous." Jason froze. Probably even if a flying object landed in front of him right now and a greenish alien came out of it, waving its tentacles, he wouldn't be more amazed. "You think?" He squeezed himself out. "Of course I do," Jane said authoritatively. "I think we should always put Martin in a 3-pronged attack with Zach and Zane. There are no other options. There's no need for unnecessary decisions." "I agree," Jason nodded, continuing to look at his wife as if she were an alien. He nodded respectfully, smiled uncertainly, and carefully moved the bowl of chips toward her. A few days later, they were jumping around on the couch and yelling like two crazy people. Jane was soon just as freaked out as Jason, counting the seconds until the final siren, cursing at refereeing errors, and eating so much junk food during the broadcast of the match that the next day she was horrified to realize how many days of continuous squatting it would take to burn off all those calories. How did they not die during the historic USA-Canada final, which our team won in the final minutes? We're left to wonder. The truth is, that night the entire vast country's heart first stopped, and then started beating at breakneck speed, spreading joy from the western to the eastern border. Basically, by finding herself drawn into the hockey madness against her will, Jane was able to get her revenge. You can stand and study. The poor thing is sitting at home, worrying, with heels higher than the Eiffel Tower on her feet. That's what I'm talking about. That's right. Now the poor childhood friend is coming over in a Ferrari. I gotta be ready for a dramatic scene. Or she'll run off, change clothes, and before he arrives, the fool will mutter from his entourage to himself and stare stubbornly at the TV. And yet Jason, regularly becoming an unwitting witness to yet another Turkish drama set against the backdrop of one of Turkey's seas, slowly became imbued with that world. One day Jane invited home two female friends she'd been friends with since high school. They were sitting in the kitchen, eating cake and talking about everything in the world. Of course, we couldn't help but talk about their favorite TV shows. "Oh, girls," sang one of them, dreamily turning her eyes. "I hear, while at home with the flu was sitting at home, watched Love Not Finished. Very interesting. They're my favorite Barack, still so cool and with a beard. It's just marvelous. How does it suit him?" "Is that Masha?" Jason's voice came into the kitchen. "Lady, I'll have another bottle of wine." "What kind of Barack is it?" "It's Barack, of course, but he's an actor, not himself. And Dinas is your school, Ravenki, and he's in all sorts of nonsense for snotty girls, but he's a very decent actor. And his movies are solid. The Magnificent Century, Osman. And then there's this one. What's his name, Jane? Well, where's your favorite plot? Rich niche and poor chemo. What's that stupid title in our favorite style? Oh, Black Love. By the way, I never realized why it was black and not blue or green." The women in the kitchen sighed in agreement and admiration. Jason, cursing himself for his long tongue, red as a cancer, flew out of the kitchen. That's how they lived. Jane cheered for the hockey team, ate roasted meat and bones, game, river fish, and made soups. Jason fought with household chores and glanced obliquely at the Turkish passions on the screen, dodging the new orchids that suddenly appeared in front of him, devouring with pleasure, including the hated cottage cheese. They did all this, of course, for each other's sake, but with pleasure. Jane, staring at a photograph hanging on the wall in a frame. The picture was taken when neither Jane nor Jason saw that they were being photographed. Jason had both arms around her and was kissing her neck. She, turning half-turned toward the camera, was laughing. It was one of the best images of them together. Jane herself stared at the photo for a long time, trying to understand where this feeling of tenderness and togetherness came from. Yes, of course, it was immediately obvious that these two were happy, that they were very well with each other. Facial expressions, eyes, smiles, and poses spoke about it. And yet it wasn't just that, there was something else. It was only after a while that Jane realized it was Jason's hands. They were the ones creating this mood, holding her by the shoulders as if they needed nothing else in this universe. If a face could lie, hands couldn't. And now he's lying and not even particularly hiding his lies. And everything in their lives is going down the drain. Jane's gaze shifted from the photograph to a small sheet of paper. This sheet, folded several times, had fallen out of his pocket yesterday. He hadn't even noticed it in the semi-darkness of the hallway. Jason's hand had written the dates and names on the paper. He didn't have to be a very good analyst to realize that it was something like a schedule for the next few days. Here, for example, tomorrow, Tuesday, there was some PZ scheduled. Apparently it's a gym. Thursday is BAS well. That's understandable, the pool. What about it? It'll be a whole week without us showing off our perfect torsos. Friday is art gallery show. Oh, it's not even abbreviated. Must be a very important event. I just wonder when he suddenly became so interested in painting. Well, her husband leads a very busy, active life. One can only envy him. He's been going round and round, poor guy. He even has to write things down so he doesn't forget, or mix them up. The list wasn't that unusual. Jason was a very active man. He liked sports and socializing. He had a bunch of friends and interests. She always knew about it and was periodically a participant in one event or another herself. But now everything was completely different. Opposite each date was a capital letter. D, where the gymnasium is next to the pool and the gallery, the letter T. Well, it's clear they're capital letters of names. E. That's some kind of Dina or Denise. And you're probably Tammy. Poor guy. I can't believe I have to put women on the list to keep from getting confused. I mean, this could be embarrassing. He came to the meeting with the machine, and their Taneka, Jane from Compton, unhappy sheet in her fist clenched, and immediately threw it away in a heartbeat. Crumpled paper balls with a quiet clatter fell to the floor and rolled a little to the side. She dropped her head on her hands and wept bitterly. She wiped her face and stared angrily out of the window. Jane's parents were absolutely amazing. They were beautiful, smart, generous, and fun. According to Jane's grandmother, they could even claim to be the best parents in the universe if they were home a little more often. They both worked at the city hospital as doctors, performing surgeries on call around the clock, doing consultations. In general, they did all the hard work that fills the life of real doctors. By the way, it was absolutely incomprehensible how they kept their cheerfulness in the mode in which they had to work. But the fact remained, Jane didn't remember her parents being in a bad mood at all. It was only years later, when she had grown up, that she finally realized that her parents kept it up for her and, despite their endless chronic fatigue, didn't want to spoil the few hours they had together. Jane adored her parents. Even though she was always asked by adults, "Jane, when you become an adult, are you going to be a doctor like your mom and dad?" And the answer was instantly and firmly, "No, of course not." The adult who asked the question, not assuming such a reaction, inertially nodded and suddenly, realizing the unexpected answer, which was completely contrary to his understanding of the situation, began to smile stupidly and confusedly. Why some adults ventured to continue the conversation after the disconcerting answer of the daughter of the two doctors. "Because I want to see my children more than twice a week," Jane cut off, finally discouraging those wishing to continue the topic from having a deficit of communication with their parents. In everything else, Jane knew no rejection, including opportunities to find herself. She'd tried everything she could think of. In her record, there were such classes as traditional for any girl: dancing, drawing, swimming, music school, and quite unexpected classes: origami and wushu. But creative sports activities did not interest her much. Jane grew up quite a lazy girl who liked to just go with the flow, to do one thing or another, and learn exactly enough not to cause questions to herself. Parents who showed up at the complete absence of ambitions and aspirations of their only child and blamed themselves for everything here say they could not instill in the child a love of active life quickly fell behind. Jane, being a lazy person, entered the teacher training institute only thanks to the target direction, which got her father. Well, and nothing, she waved away. "I'll work these 5 years. So what if I live in peace?" Peace of mind was Jane's main focus in life. "Jane, you should have been born a wooden pillow," laughed Mary, a soulful friend who had known Jane since high school and who always told her the truth in her own eyes, would lay herself on her side, thinking of nothing. One day, a rather large and noisy group of friends, and they tore off to the sea. Just a couple of hours in the airplane. And there it was, huge and beautiful, tender and warm. When the first delight passed, came the realization that she was not ready for the season. Not that everything was bad, but it was a long way from self-confidence. The disappointment was brought on by the swimsuit. The fabric on her thighs cut into her skin far more than she would have liked. Jane, instead of looking favorable in the swimsuit, somehow ended up with smaller breasts than she had hoped for. So she decided she didn't need a tan. Besides, it was unhealthy, and she could easily do without bathing. For the rest of her vacation, she walked around with a light shawl elegantly tied around her hips and her stomach pulled in as much as possible. That evening, Jane refused to go to the restaurant with the company. For some reason, she wanted to be alone, to wander along the almost empty and unusually quiet seashore after 9 o'clock. Besides, she secretly admitted to herself that she must look extremely attractive and romantic from the outside, a lonely beauty in a wide-brimmed hat on the seashore. She slowly walked along the edge, where the sand, barely hidden by the escaping wave, was wet and pleasantly cold to her feet. She held her hat with her hand, just in case. Of course, the accessory was chic, but frankly very impractical. The slightest breeze blew up the brim, and the hat would fly away. Jane had chased a fugitive down the beach a few times before, blushing and forgetting to keep her stomach taut, probably looking disgusting. Now everything was wonderful. The light sea breeze was ruffling the thin brim of her hat, making it look mysterious. Jane gazed languidly into the distance, where the setting sun was sinking into the sea, a perfect picture. The last rays of the evening were flooding her skin, and she seemed very tanned. To make it even more perfect, she waded mid-thigh into the water. Suddenly it all disappeared. A tanned hand flashed before her eyes, and Jane collapsed into the water. Fireworks erupted in her head. Seawater rushed into her ears and mouth. Not realizing what was happening, stunned, confused, she wanted to scream, but instead she just gulped water. Jane might have become the first vacationer in history to drown in shallow water, but thankfully that didn't happen. The next second she felt strong arms beneath her, tearing her upward toward the air. She clutched convulsively at one of those saving hands and suddenly heard a soft, full of pleading voice. "Girl, dear, please let go. You've driven your nails into my hand. It hurts a lot. Let go. Honestly, I'll throw you back now." With a frightened jerk of her hands, she looked at the man who had spoken. And things got even worse than they had been. No, of course, he was not up to the role in her favorite Turkish TV series. But he was still handsome. It was silly to deny it, and she didn't want to. If she was to be rescued from the abyss of the sea, it would be by such a handsome man. He had the right features, blonde hair that was probably just burned out, gray eyes that squinted a little, and very tanned skin, on which the white teeth of his smile stood out clearly. His shoulders were broad and he moved smoothly, with a sense of power. All in all, damn near perfect. She herself, on the other hand, was probably terribly wet right now, her hair sticking to her head and face in bunches. All her light Mediterranean makeup, on which she had spent an hour and a half in the hotel, had naturally floated. And most likely her face now looked like a mask of a fallen Papuan, with horrible tentacles of eyes, which had already acquired an intriguing purple hue. In short, the image of the romantic beauty was ready. The damned handsome man continued to carry her silently in his arms, apparently without even bothering. It was very pleasant, but it was time to know the honor, especially wanted to know the final destination of their unexpected run. "Excuse me, where are you going?" "Anyway, what's going on?" she finally decided. The man was young, mid-30s, maybe even less, and looked up at him fearfully. Tired after all, noticing the droplets of sweat on his forehead. Yes, and the Savior's breathing became less even and could be heard quite clearly now. "Where to?" "To the infirmary, of course. There's a piece of bottle sticking out of your leg," the man said. Jane swept the tangled, sand-stained strands away from her face as gracefully as possible. She looked at her foot, which had been pulled up by her own scarf, and almost fainted. There was indeed a large piece of thick bottle glass sticking out of her foot. Apparently it was lodged in her foot and would not come out on its own. "So? You don't feel anything at all?" he wondered. "No, it's probably shock," said the daughter of the medics confidently, and finally really lost consciousness. She woke up on the couch, and alas, instead of the face of the beach handsome over her bent funny red head with a thick beard. "Well, are you awake?" asked the head. "I wanted to do CPR." He grinned merrily. "What's wrong with me? And where am I?" Jane asked pointless questions. "You're in the hospital," the man explained patiently. "You have a foot injury, so I'm afraid your active vacation is over. You don't have your phone with you, do you?" "Well, I thought so." "It's all right. Your knight will be back to help you." "My what?" she asked fearfully. "Knight. Well, the guy who brought you here. He's very good, by the way, I'll tell you that. First of all, it's a good 3 kilometers from here to the shoreline. And secondly, it's a good thing he didn't pull the glass out. It would have bled a lot. And stitched it up. And thirdly, he's just good, that's all. Oh, really? I don't even know him. Jane was glad to herself that the handsome savior was not a figment of imagination or the result of sunstroke, but existed in reality. Yeah, but that's not a problem. Then you'll meet him. Especially since he's about to show up, the doctor smirked. Idiot. Brainless fool, Jane scolded herself, trying to cover her face as much as possible with her dried hair. Instead of coddling, you'd better ask for a napkin to wipe your face, you scarecrow. The savior was dressed in white shorts and a light plaid shirt. Sunglasses sat on his nose, and the whole man was even more handsome than Jane remembered. Now he was quite comparable, even to her idols from Turkish melodramas. Yes, and the whole situation was terribly romantic and worthy of a play. All except for her appearance, of course. Jane sat up awkwardly and gingerly lowered her feet to the floor. Her tightly bound leg whimpered unpleasantly, and pain literally shot through her leg as it made contact with the surface. Oh, Jane cried out, looking at the doctor pitifully. It hurts, doesn't it? She heard a familiar soft voice and looked at the man. He was standing in front of her and smiling, as if seeing her shaggy, with mascara smeared on her face, and a different swimsuit was the rarest happiness in his life. Jason turned out to be a local. Their family had a small house near the sea, where Jason lived with his mom. He came every day, brought flowers, oranges, ice cream, drove her around the coast in an old but serviceable car, and always wanted to carry her in his arms. They stopped in small cafes with tables facing the sea, sat under striped awnings and ate incredibly tasty cakes, or the best kebab in the world, as the owner of the establishment claimed. And judging by the taste, if he exaggerated only a little. Jane squinted fearfully at the mussels, which smelled of the sea. Jason hummed understandingly, setting a plate of steaming hinkali in front of her. Jason, I wanted to lose weight on vacation. She wailed, taking another bite of the impossibly delicious local cuisine. Don't make it up. You look fine as you are. And you don't need to lose any weight, Jason smiled, slipping her a scoop of ice cream. Then they sat side by side on the shore, listening to the sea, feeling that the world around them had changed forever and completely. And the reason for that change was sitting very close by. Jane, I love you and I want you to be my wife, Jason said a week later. What, are you crazy? We've known each other for 7 days. No, you're definitely crazy. She was as shocked and stunned as when she'd fallen into the sea. 7 days? It's almost 8. And it doesn't really matter whether it's 8 days, months, or years. We know each other, he smiled. But I can't stay here with you. I have to go home. I have a job, a contract, she exclaimed helplessly and joyfully at the same time. It seemed to her that this whole strange, unbelievable, unthinkable situation would just be resolved now, because Jason would say, well, but there's no judgment. You can't do it, you can't do it. What can I do? By instead, he was silent for a long time. Then he shook his head stubbornly and said, she herself was lazy, there was no denying it. And it wasn't just in her lifestyle, it was in her thoughts. The problems that arose in her life, she preferred to solve in a simple and universal way. She stopped thinking about them. At least for a while. Jason was the opposite. It was as if for him there were no problems that could just seriously stump him. He just set a problem and solved it as quickly as possible. So quickly that Jane sometimes didn't even have time to fully realize the problem. He was a programmer or some kind of software specialist. In general, as the IT people said, Jane didn't know much about it at all. The main thing was that Jason was a high-end specialist, and he had no trouble finding a job. In fact, he wasn't looking for one. A couple days after he'd moved in, he was already going somewhere with bread, tea, and coffee from a huge mug. Where are you going? Jane asked in surprise. In her mind, a man who had changed his fate so radically needed at least 6 months to just look around, get used to his new surroundings, pick up his options. Where to, Jane? Jason wondered. To work, of course. I'm a young husband, but I'm not going to sit on my wife's neck. By the way, I banged my elbow 3 times on the corner while I was shaving. Jane, your bathroom is impossibly small, and your whole apartment. Let's expand right now. She freaked out. The apartment she had inherited from her grandmother was very small indeed. Daddy called it a doll's house because of its miniaturization. She loved her dwelling and it was cozy, but of course there wasn't enough room for 2 people. It wasn't complicated or horrible. It's just a matter of getting started, Jason said. I've got it all figured out. Look, we're selling this little apartment. I still have about the same amount of money, so we add a loan and buy a normal, spacious 2-bedroom apartment. Anyway, we're not doing anything for Sunday. We're going to look at options. What options? Jane was even more frightened. Apartment options, Jason nodded. Why do we need a 3-bedroom? She continued to be afraid. Jason, that's a lot of money. What would we need 3 rooms for? I mean, that's a lot of walking around all day dusting. Where would we go? Jason took offense. You and I are going to be alone all the time. I'm going to get serious about expanding our family. You and I are going to have children. And about money, that's not your concern. Don't worry about anything. It's going to be fine. He did everything so quickly, decisively, no matter what the issue was: getting married and moving to another city, buying an apartment, getting a loan or a job. Jane, of course, couldn't think with the same speed, let alone do. Selling her old apartment and buying a new one was like traveling to another planet. But Jason had taken the job without delay and in earnest. A month later, they moved into a large, bright apartment with a huge loggia. Jane's first thought was, how many windows are there? What about all of us? At this point, she almost longed for her little old lady apartment with its 2 small wooden window frames, one of which had long ago become loose and jammed shut. Jane had therefore been spared the necessity of opening it and cleaning the panes inside and out, and now she was surrounded on all sides by huge glass and mirror surfaces that seemed to be screaming, "That's it, you're finished. Quickly grab a rag and wipe me down. Can't you see how dusty I am?" Despite the initial consternation, Jane did get used to the new apartment, especially as it turned out that in a large space, dust and scattered things were not as noticeable as they had been in their former tiny apartment. It was harder to get used to the normal pace of Jason's life, from Jane's point of view. Her friend Mary's predictions were coming true. She was no longer able to keep up with her husband. He constantly needed to do something, go somewhere, or meet someone. And all of this he wanted to do together with her, with Svetlana. Well, I don't like all this running and fuss. I'm different, lazy, fat, Jane thought. Everyone, are you going to the gym tonight? Jason said before leaving for work in the morning. No, I'm not going tonight, Jane smiled tightly, as if going to the gym was a daily occurrence for her. In fact, the last time she'd been there had been over a month ago. Jason looked at his wife confidently and sighed. Absolutely. Right. And she smiled even wider. I wondered what would have happened if I'd said I was going. Would he have had to cancel his meeting or whatever he had planned for today? You've got a nerve, Jane thought as she watched the door close behind Jason. And he's pretty sure I'm not going to the club. I'm going to go. Just not the way he thinks I should. I'll see what sport my beloved husband really plays. Jane's going to the gym again? Come on, skiing's better for her. Where is this fitness craze coming from? Why do people dislike themselves so much that they're willing to torture their muscles and ligaments with iron equipment for the sake of self-love? Jane was embarking on a slippery slope. To be honest, she didn't like herself very much. Of course, she wanted to have taut thighs, strong arms, a slim waist with barely visible relief of the abs. But God forbid she should have those notorious cubes. only slightly, so that it was visible that she is working on the abs. She didn't have to have ribs and abs, just so that her sides didn't blend in with the waistband of her jeans or ripple when she moved. She understood the need for physical activity, recognized the role of sports in people's lives, and even liked it. That is, his sport was very much to her liking. Theoretically, for example, on television, especially when there were big sports tournaments like the Olympics. Then Jane became an athlete at heart, too sucking in her stomach, trying to eat right and walk. She gave herself her word of honor to go to the gym on Monday. However, it was not specified for Monday of what week, month, or year it would happen. The year wasn't important either. She was terrified of gyms. First of all, because of those for whom, judging by their appearance, that Monday had started years ago. They were all strikingly thin, slim, and pumped up. They made Jane and her kind look like members of a scraggly, backward branch of evolution. Embarrassed, she canceled the training, proudly left the gym, and decided to start the fight for a beautiful body, not with physical exertion, but with proper nutrition. To do this, she bought a fruit and vegetable juice at the bar, sipping the strange-tasting mixture and pretending on her face of healthy pleasure. She mentally converted the cost of the drink into the amount of whole fruits and vegetables, getting an approximate weight of several kilograms. She was finally convinced that the sports club was a pure scam, and decisively left the abode of sports. Jane simply could not bring herself to do regular exercise at home alone for a number of reasons. First, it is impossible to provide a suitable microclimate for exercise in the apartment. Secondly, it is psychologically difficult to achieve the right level of motivation alone, as psychologists say. She honestly tried to start, even bought a CD with the workouts of a famous American fitness trainer with a loud and nasty voice. The trainer was obviously meant to motivate Jane. With great difficulty doing a difficult warm-up, she heard that it was only a warm-up and the workout itself would start now. After that, the budding athlete turned off the disc and lay down to rest. Her muscles were so sore that she had to eat to regain her strength. Her body demanded a double portion of calories, which nullified all her endeavors. Jason loved the gym and the pool, going there at least twice a week. He announced that Jane would be going now too. He was like a fish in water, moving and strong, as if he were made of ready-made muscles, scurrying between the machines. He managed to chat with a lot of people, drink 2 liters of water, run a lot of kilometers on the treadmill. While Jane was huffing and puffing, painfully spinning a few hundred meters on the exercise bike, her thighs hanging disgustingly off the seat. Sweat dripped down her face, turning her already not-so-beautiful hair into icicles. Next to her, some slender blonde with long legs and a shiny ponytail was pedaling vigorously. Jane imagined how she looked against the cyclist. She tried to increase her speed to escape from the embarrassment, but the trainer kept her intentionally chained to the seat next to her neighbor. It was even worse at the pool because there were a lot more people. Covering herself with her palms and trying to move so that those around her could see only her smiling face, Jane hurriedly covered the distance between the locker rooms and the pool and hurried to get into the water. She could only swim doggy style, and that was with a Norwegian dog. Periodically, she went under. Pushing off the edge with an independent look, Jane dragged herself a few meters forward, convulsively holding her breath, quickly paddling back to the saving edge. People who had apparently been born with fins were occasionally passing by, or else how could they explain this ease of movement in the water? Jason was a great swimmer. He swung his arms relentlessly, gliding quickly and easily through the water, not down the ladder, but diving from above. I had to hand it to him neither at the gym nor in the pool. If they came together, did he leave Jane behind? He was always hanging around, keeping her in his sights, catching her glances and smiling encouragingly. At first he tried to help her, for example, to teach her to swim, but was firmly rejected. Jane honestly tried to lift her lower body to a horizontal position on the surface of the water and stay there. But apparently her 5th point was arranged differently, because it resolutely did not want to rise and pretend to be afloat. So Jane waved goodbye and hung around near the exit, enjoying the smell of chlorine or the sight of a nimble, head to toe soaked. Very handsome Jason at these moments. Of course, she'd come to the gym where she and Jason had season tickets. Only Jason used it every week. Jane had to work hard to find the plastic pass card in her mad dash, trying to blend into the landscape as much as possible. She was lucky enough to hide behind a very fat lady who didn't seem to mind her size, which was enough to take up 2 exercise bikes at once. The lady was pedaling merrily. Jason entered the gym, did his exercises, spent time on the treadmill, and disappeared into the locker room. No one ever showed up. In any case, none of the ladies in attendance seemed particularly interested in Jason. Thursday, she dragged herself to Jason's workout again, now at the pool. He didn't even call me, she thought resentfully. Well, someone would be there today. Jason was already here. He was darting from one end of the pool to the other, sprinting from the edge like a dolphin. Jane, careful to stay out of the way, occasionally peeked out of the water, seeing her husband's broad shoulders and white cap. A couple of times she thought that Jason was looking in her direction, and from fright she even dived headfirst into the water. And all that sacrifice was for nothing, because he didn't see anyone again. That doesn't mean anything, Jane thought stubbornly. After all, no normal woman likes her suitor to see her sweaty and flushed or wet. So they don't go out with him. An art gallery is a different matter. That's where you get to show your best self. Let's see what Jason's preferences are now. Jane, will you go to the gallery with me on Friday? Jason asked me out of the blue. Why would I do that? She raised her eyebrows in surprise. Of course I would. I told you Billy Shepard has an exhibition. Remember my buddy? I told you about him. We met about 15 years ago when he used to come to our house to paint seascapes. He didn't have a dime, so he lived with us. As payment, he painted my mom's portrait. Great guy. So he has a solo exhibition, no more, no less. He's invited me several times. I can't not go. What a bunch of art lovers, Jane said. How could Billy ask him to go? A very convenient excuse to sneak out of the house. Jane herself considered herself an unquestionably educated and cultured person. Yet she had been born into a family where one wall of a large room was almost entirely occupied by shelves of books. Jane really read a lot of books, watched the best films in the history of cinematography, has repeatedly been in theaters, the Metropolitan Museum of Art, and other famous galleries. In short, she was a person of culture. But she had her own culture, her own personal culture, if I may say so. She had her own way of looking at some issues, a little specific. Are you a cultural dissident, Jane? Jason laughed, getting to know the woman he loved better. A kind of cultural opposition. For example, Jane didn't like ballet, but she didn't like it. She couldn't help it. After going to a few performances, she was convinced that this dislike is strong and insurmountable. Jane, it's a unique art form. Jason exclaimed. It's not art, it's technique, and unchanging, like canned goods, cut off the theater, Jane. The same movements 10 years ago, 50 years ago, 100 years ago. The legs are disfigured, the hands are like anatomical aids, and the men are in tights. She ended with the eternal ballet question, why can't men dance in normal costumes? Why do they have to wear pantyhose and white tights? Jason laughed until he cried. And Jane told him she was never going to ballet again. Or the opera, for that matter. What's wrong with the opera, Jason? I mean, everyone's dressed up, I guess. Doesn't it bother you when Carmen, who's 3 times the size of what's his name? Lover, you're Jose. Okay, Jane, I get it. Of all the spectacular arts, we're left with the movies. Well, that's good too, so we'll go to the movies. Jane loved movies, but one for which she didn't have to get dressed, go somewhere, stand in line, and then sit for an hour and a half, or even longer, in an uncomfortable chair with no opportunity to stretch her legs. And even better, to lie down, cozily covered with a plaid. The exhibition was unexpectedly crowded. It seems that this John actually turned out to be a decent artist. Otherwise, how else to explain the numerous groups of people in front of the paintings, who looked at them with a meaningful look, nodded their heads and spoke softly to each other. Yes, he has become much stronger in composition. Certainly the color palette. Notice how well the details are worked out, and what precise control of tone. John's popularity as a painter was to Jane's advantage. At least she was able to hide between the visitors and at the same time keep in sight the broad-shouldered figure of her husband in a perfectly fitting suit. Once again, something went wrong. Women appeared around Jason all the time, and many of them were very nice. He smiled, talked, even kissed a few ladies' hands. But none of it was suspicious at all. Finally, he hugged gustily and fervently. But the object of his affection was not some pretty girl, but a short, bald-headed man with a long nose. It was the owner of the show, John, whom Jason had been friends with for years. So what if he hasn't met anyone? I leave early so I don't run into him. And he might at this very time, Jane thought stubbornly as she sat in the cab. What exactly Jason was doing at this very time, she was afraid to imagine. You shouldn't have refused to go to the exhibition, he said when he got home. It was a very nice event. John, it turned out, was already a very famous artist. That's probably why they had really good canapes at the buffet. So you've lost a lot. Although he suddenly pulled himself up, tensed, and spoke in a low voice. He was suspiciously quick to unbutton his shirt. It's a good thing you didn't go, and I missed you. In general, there was no time to suspect anything for the next half an hour. But the suspicions resurfaced as soon as Jason brought up the subject of the vacation they'd been fighting about for days. Jason had been urging Jane to go to the sea, but she'd been stubborn about it. You know what, Jane, I'll go. Jason suddenly said, I haven't seen my mom in a long time, and I miss her. And besides, or didn't know about her handsome son's relationships. That's exactly how it works, Anne said with a smile. It looks like you're the one he's been waiting for all these years. It was obvious that even if the stories about monster mothers-in-law were true, Anne wasn't one of them. She wasn't going to fight her son's choice, teach her about life, or pretend to be more than a mom to Jason. Even when it became clear that there would be no grandchildren, she found the strength to support her daughter-in-law wholeheartedly. Well, Jane, she said, I can't hide it's very sad for all of us. But we shall be hopeful. Don't give up and don't give in. She banged her fist on the table with excitement. Don't you think it would be better for Jason to break up with me? Jane asked suddenly, not losing her composure for a moment. Anne looked at her seriously. Perhaps. Only I know one thing, my son loves you very much, Jane. He's happy with you. I can see it. What you've already given him is more important to him than what you can't yet. After being suspicious all night, Jane dialed her mother-in-law's number. Anne, hello. It's me, Jane. Jane, baby, came a cheerful voice in the receiver. I'm so glad to hear from you. It's been so long since we've seen each other. Why didn't you and Jason come? Yes, well, Jane mumbled. It didn't work out. I had a lot to do. And, Anne, can you tell me where Jason is? He's not answering his phone for some reason? Oh, he's been weird. This time he's always driving around, running around. I mean, we haven't had a decent conversation since he got here. And yesterday he went to the barber shop. Can you imagine? I said to him, why can't you get a haircut at home, son? And he's talking to me about some very important meeting. He bought a new suit yesterday, a white shirt. It's like he didn't fly to the sea, but to a symposium. Your favorite son didn't fly to a symposium, but to a date. Jane almost burst out. I'll tell him to call you right away. Are you sure you're all right, Jane? You sound a little sad. Anne was visibly worried. Noticed it at last, Jane thought. I won't see him until tonight, Anne continued. He said he'd be late. A friend of his is opening a new restaurant on the waterfront. When he found out Jason had flown in, he came running to his feet, saying, "Help me, save me." Well, you know Jason. Who could say no to help? He's out there all day installing computer programs to make them work. Well, I don't know anything about it. But Jason says the opening's coming up and they just can't keep up. I guess it's a good thing he shows up in the morning. Jason's mom laughed. Sure is a convenient cover, Jane thought. It'll make it easy to get home in the morning. The restaurant is called Evening Breeze. It's not very original, of course. That's what I told the boys, Anne went on. Jason thinks it's going to be the best place in town. Oh, I've been talking to you, Jane. It's just been so long since I've seen you. I'll be sure to tell Jason you're worried. And I'll give him the head of the sink for it. I promise you that. All right, sweethearts. Bye-bye kisses. The mother-in-law abruptly disconnected. Jane looked at the phone doubtfully, restless, active, inquisitive. Jason had taken after his mother. But the woman had another quality the son hadn't inherited. She was talkative, and like any loving mother, loved to talk about her child. And so it came to pass that, without asking hardly any questions, Jane knew where Jason was spending his vacation evenings. Who he intended to spend his nights with, she would see for herself. 24 hours later, she was stepping off the plane in a familiar seaside town. She had no trouble finding out the address of the restaurant Anne had given her. Evening Breeze was indeed opening soon, and advertisements for it were broadcast among others on the airport's huge monitor. It was posted on one of the shuttle buses in front of the stop. After filling out the address, Jane sank tiredly onto the bench. So what do we do now, she wondered. This is just awful. I'll get there. I'll see Jason with some hottie or other girl. So what? What's that going to change? She pulled herself back. I'll look him in his pretty face and spit. Maybe, if my mouth isn't too dry, I'll walk away. That's it. Jane glanced resolutely at her watch and strode toward the bus stop. A small, nimble bus took her almost to the waterfront. As soon as she stepped out of the stuffy cabin, she could smell the sea. Her eyes caught the turquoise sheen of the sea surface with pleasure. Well, of course, the Evening Breeze. What else would one call a restaurant here, she involuntarily thought. A large, brown-railed area overlooked almost the shoreline, like a small pier. It was evident that there was minor work going on everywhere, the unfinished work that would precede the big renovation. But on the terrace there were already a mixture of light tables, chairs and armchairs, cauldrons with tropical plants, the edges of a huge white awning and white tablecloths. The broad palm leaves were lightly ruffled by a barely perceptible breeze. Would you like to have dinner? A soft, soft voice sounded above her head. Jane dropped her bag from her hands in surprise. I'm sorry, sir, did I startle you? The young man said with a smile, lifting her bag from the sand. I just thought you were hesitant to go any further. But are you open? Jane wondered. Yes, we've already started working, the boy nodded. My name is Nathan, by the way. He showed her his name tag on his chest and waiter's badge. You see, our official opening is really only in a few days. But in fact, we are already serving our guests, and at the same time we are studying the wishes, trying to take into account and correct the defects. So what about dinner? Jane was suddenly very hungry. She was so hungry that her stomach rumbled, and she looked fearfully at the boy. Had he heard? He must have, because he smiled slightly and made an inviting gesture toward the terrace. Jane quickly straightened her hair, tugged awkwardly at her crumpled dress, and stepped forward. You just put me in a corner somewhere. Okay, so I can't be seen, she mumbled to the boy's back. Okay, I'll put you somewhere they won't find you, he smiled, glancing around. The place was really secluded, and a little off to the side in a small cubbyhole and behind a row of plants. Jason was nowhere to be seen. After a few minutes, though, she forgot why she was here. A plate of baked fish and vegetables was placed in front of her. It was so delicious that eating the tender, juicy white meat took over her senses and her mind at the same time. Nice girl. The fish knife lies just to the left of the fork. This is wider. The one you're holding is for butter. It's blunt and won't do you any good, she said over her head. Jane flinched and dropped the wrong knife from her hand. In the doorway, slender, handsome, in a light-colored suit that looked especially great against his tanned skin, his hair carelessly laid back, Jason was looking at her with a smile. She found herself here. Jane realized that she had never felt so stupid in her life as she did at this moment. "Weren't you supposed to be here today?" Jason said suddenly. "Why here?" she wondered. "Jane, don't you recognize this place?" Jason asked. "What place?" She looked around. "This restaurant has just been built. How can I recognize it?" "What's a restaurant got to do with it?" Jason waved his hand. "I meant the place. Look around." She looked around carefully. What was there to recognize? The coast is the same everywhere, sand and water. "And you're still a romantic," Jason laughed. "I don't want to torture you because you won't figure it out until morning. Look, this is the place where we met. Remember, you were floundering like a sea naiad and I, like a young sea god, was rescuing you from the sea. Over there, see?" He pointed to a group of white buildings, which seemed quite toy-like from here. "That's where he was carrying you." Wait, Jane realized Anne told me the name of the restaurant. Does she know? Is she in on this with you? "Well, my mom played along," Jason nodded. "How could she not? I wouldn't have gotten you out here. I really wanted to have a day like this." "What kind of day?" Jane looked up, frantically remembering. Jason rolled his eyes. "Jane, you're incorrigible." He sighed. "Today is exactly 10 years to the day we met on this spot." Like a magician, he pulled a bouquet of flowers from somewhere under the table. Luckily, it was big enough for Jane to hide her shame-filled face behind it. "Jason, who are the U and D on your weekly to-do list?" she squeezed out. He looked at his wife, who had been shaking with laughter for a couple minutes. "Wiping away her tears," he said. "What makes you think the D and the T are anyone?" "Jane, the D is Dimitrov. And the T, have you seen it? You know I keep forgetting to take my allergy pills. So I marked it just in case." "God, I'm so stupid." "I'm sorry," Jane mumbled, completely destroyed. "I will, of course. Where would I go?" Jason grinned. Everyone had forgotten. "Although, to be honest, I didn't realize you were so jealous. It's flattering. Listen, Vic, the local chef, who's a terrific cook, by the way, made a dessert just for you and me." Jason glanced around and waved to Zane, who nodded and left. But he returned a few minutes later with the dish in his hands, smiling triumphantly and placing it on the table. "Here, Jane, my favorite. Happy anniversary," Jason said solemnly. There was a strawberry chocolate dessert on the platter. The chef had really gone to the trouble of depicting their initials standing in a thin chocolate basket among the creamy strawberries. The dessert was a little masterpiece of pastry art. Any normal person should have frozen in rapture and then begun to cringe at how such beauty could be ruined and eaten. But apparently Jane was not quite a normal person, because at the sight of the dessert suddenly experienced a sharp and completely unexpected attack of nausea. It was all the more unexpected, considering that Jane had always been an omnivorous person with a strong stomach and an excellent appetite. She turned pale, jumped up, put her palm to her mouth, and rushed away. Jason was confused and bewildered. After waiting a few seconds, he rushed after her. This was definitely not how he had imagined his beloved woman's reaction to the meal he had prepared for them. much less the end of a romantic evening. Staggering, Jane walked out of the ladies' room. Jason was loitering on the sidelines. He ran up to her and took her hand, peering into her eyes. "What's the matter, darling? Did you get poisoned? Jesus, let's walk with you to the hospital right now." "The hospital where I dragged you with the glass in your leg. Can you walk, or can I carry you?" How sick was she? She couldn't take it anymore and laughed. "Jason, it's been 10 years. You can't carry me now." Half an hour later, they were at the hospital, where fortunately a doctor Jason knew well was on duty. Jane was quiet and even a little thinner, and she came out of the treatment room and sat quietly next to Jason. He rushed toward her. "So did you get poisoned after all?" he asked anxiously. "I'm going to blow this stuff to smithereens. I don't know what I—" "Wait, don't scream," Jane soothingly stroked her husband's arm. "It's not their fault in the slightest. My condition is all your fault, Jason, honey. I'm pregnant." Jason flinched and looked up at her. If there were any lingering suspicions deep inside him that disgusted him, they dissolved completely, and without a trace in the happy glow his eyes flashed with.